Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting and to provide a brief overview of the day's business? Today the committee will consider subordinate legislation, a departmental briefing on the outcome of the October monitoring and an update on the 22 to 25 budget. Can I advise members that due to witnesses and some members joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to ask questions at each agenda item. Also, if members could mute their mic if they're not speaking, this would allow everyone to hear the evidence and follow the meeting. Can I also advise members that the room must be vacated at 1 o'clock at the latest, and I request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. Agenda item number 1, which is apologies. As Chair, I have none. Is anybody in the room on apologies? Any apologies? No. Okay. We will move on to agenda item number 2, which is Chairperson's business. I have none. Go on now to agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes, and could I turn members' attention to the draft minutes at page 6 of the meeting on the 24th of November 2021. Are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Members agreed, and there's no matters arising from, agenda item number 4 is matters arising. Can I turn members' attention to page 14, matters arising from the meeting on the 24th of November, or 24th of November 2021, and can I ask members if they have any issues arising from the meeting? I'm not seeing any indications. Could I turn members' attention to page 17, which is outstanding committee requests for information? For members noting. Okay, members, we will now move to correspondence, agenda item number 5, and draw members' attention to the correspondence memo at page 31, and we'll take time to just go through this because there is some items to note and other members' rising. So 5.2, which is the raised paper on vehicle defects as a contributing factor in road accidents, members to note. Unless anybody at any stage wishes to come in, please raise the hand as appropriate. Agenda correspondence memo 5.3. Yes, this is something that I did want to raise. It's allegations against the driver vehicle agency from a member of the public. Now, members, it says here to note and agree to forward to the department for information and comment. I think this is something, and I see that our Vice Chair has been named in this particular correspondence, and I know it's something that you have been raising in relation to taxi entrapment and trying to find some information. Members, I'm in your hands as to what to do with this point. I did read through the correspondence, and there was some stark allegations, particularly against DVA. I suppose while not being fully armed with all the facts in relation to that, I do think it would be important for us as a committee to garner the full information and see if by means of a meeting in relation to enforce our entrapment would be something that would be worthwhile to the committee, because obviously the allegations that have been made are quite stark. I'll hand it maybe to the Vice Chair if you wish to make comment, because I know you were mentioned in the correspondence.
Yes, Chair, this has been around quite a few elected folk in the sort of East, Southampton, North Belfast area. The gentleman is also not just a taxi driver, he also holds an operator's licence as well. Now, I know I'm very sort of wary, and I've told him as well in relation to individual complaints, as it were. Sometimes we step back a wee bit and don't get involved in individual type complaints. But certainly there's issues here which are of concern. There's no doubt about it, and the fact that others are affected and will pay a fine of maybe £200 to £300 and be off the road maybe for a week or something like that, or 10 days, rather than go to court and have to be maybe out several £1,000s trying to claim their innocence in some of these matters. Also worry as well that there's a court case ongoing as well, which has been adjourned to 25th of January. There's one court case over, as indicated last week or the week before, and we're still awaiting some information coming from DVA on that as to how they viewed that hearing, which went against them, very much so. So it's a bit of a, we're sort of sitting with one case over and certainly others, and this is the first time they've really been challenged on these issues. Okay. And as I say, there is some worrying stuff contained within the correspondence and other stuff, which, if the gentleman got an opportunity to speak with the committee, may open the committee's eyes to what maybe has been going on.
Okay. Well, maybe just look across the clerk to see what the legalities would be in terms of the committee meeting with the gentleman.
Well, there is reference in the correspondence to an ongoing case, Chair, so while that's ongoing,
Yeah, it
I
would be.
would suggest that maybe not.
Okay.
Now, there's one definitely over and finished with, of which the DVA lost as well, but...
Okay, well, maybe as a first point of action, if members were agreed, how about we first of all write to the department for more information surrounding the particulars contained within the correspondence, and if the committee at that stage is not content with what we've received, that we then organise a briefing.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, don't want to interrupt you, but did we not do this last week in relation to the court case that is over? Because the department came back to say that they couldn't proceed because there was an ongoing court case.
Yeah.
But it was clear that one court case was over, so they've already sort of tried to keep us at bay with that, which we obviously dispelled last week, and I think we're right to them again last week.
Yeah, we could have make it more specific to try to get information from the particular case that is now closed, which obviously the committee aren't content with the sort of constant, well, we're in legal action and other aspects, which means we can't comment. If we got particular detail regarding the case that is closed, and following that, I think what we need to do is have a briefing on that to the committee, and if it is appropriate at that stage, if that case is closed, that we organise and give the opportunity for the individual to come before the committee, if that's in order. And I have to check with the clerk that would be in order.
Sure, again, Chair, sorry for interrupting, but I know we're coming up to the Christmas period anyway, so the 25th of January or whatever date to adjourn to the second case. It'll not be long going in anyway, you know, so there's going to be a break in business anyway, but it's something I think we as a committee need to not take the eye off at this stage, because there is, as a scrutiny committee, there does appear to be something there that we should be looking at.
Okay. I'll go to the clerk.
Sure, well, as somebody who's just stepped into this role, I'm not sure if there is a representative body for the taxi industry. However, this is an individual case, and it's something that the committee, committee wouldn't normally get into at that level. But if there is a wider issue and there is an appropriate body that the committee can go to, it might be preferable.
Certainly in the meetings that I've had with the gentleman, I've been very clear to him that if it can be brought on a wider issue stakes rather than him against the department as such. As he is an operator, he's not just a taxi driver, he is also an operator. And when COVID was being discussed here, they were able to bring themselves together and present 3 or 4 operators here. Maybe that could be done as well.
Is there a representative body that you're aware
rather than an individual?
Okay. I'm going to go to Roy here as a comment to make on this, and then I'll go back, and then Cahalane, and then I'll come back to the clerk.
My understanding is the issue of entrapment.
Yes.
Should we be reaching out to all taxi operators for any relevant information that they have where they feel there has been entrapment, just to get general advice or feedback from the industry? The other aspect that strikes me is, if there is a court case that's over, can we receive a copy of the judgment and what actually was the outcome? You know, I would have thought that was reasonable. That will give us a feel for where things are, and we need to make sure that the department will have learnt from any such cases.
Okay, thank you. Cahalane?
Yeah, Chair, no, I would agree with both comments earlier. I think there's a broader issue, and I think that if we tease it out to see exactly how broad it is, I think there's others out there on that capacity, then it could happen right across the industry. So let's look, and I would agree with that.
So what I'm suggesting, and what I hear from the floor, is that first and foremost, we are going to write to the department regarding the outcome of this case that is now closed, regarding the case, and maybe if that's in form of a briefing as well would be good, and a wider sort of piece in relation to if we were to write out to the taxi operators to find out if there is a wider issue of entrapment, and maybe a briefing organised from them in relation to that. That's what I'm hearing from the floor. I want to go to the clerk just to check to make sure that's in order as a proposed way forward.
Yeah, certainly, Chair, it is. If all taxi operators are being contacted, then it becomes a general issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are members content with those action points in relation to that correspondence? Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, members. We'll move on down now through item 5.4, which is from the Department for Infrastructure, launch of a consultation to consider making careless driving a fixed penalty. Members to note and agree a scheduled briefing in the forward work programme on the outcome of the consultation. 5.5, the Fiscal Council, members to note. 5.6, TransLink, a response to the committee regarding the recent attacks on public transport, again for members to note. And again, members come in if there's any point you wish to raise. 5.7, which was the Minister for Infrastructure ministerial statement, which was this week. 5.8, Department for Infrastructure consultation on secondary legislation to further commence implement the requirements of the Reservoir Act. Members to note again and agree a scheduled briefing in the forward work programme. 5.9, which is members' development and personal security session. Members to note. 5.10 is the Minister for Infrastructure response to the issues arising from the committee meeting on the 10th of November. And I will go back to that, members, because I think that is always a considerable piece in relation to some of the issues that have been raised. I suppose probably one point that I would like to raise, or two actually, is number one being the issue surrounding the taxi licensing for funeral directors. I'm still continuing to get quite a number of correspondence in relation to this, members, and I think it is a very sensitive issue, which I'm not satisfied that we've had an adequate response from the department on. So I would say that we probably could put this on the schedule for the briefing when the Minister does come to the committee. This particular issue surrounding taxi licensing for funeral directors, and particularly in limousine driving. Are members content to have that put onto the agenda for whenever the Minister comes before the committee? Agreed. Okay, members, and the other point I wish to raise, which was the DVA driving test backlog. I know we have put on record our desire to see a form of a reserve list for those that have failed their driving test. I do still feel this is something that needs to be given particular attention to, given that I've said about the financial hardship as members for somebody that has failed a test and at the moment could not secure something before March. I think that period of time is particularly difficult, not only from a financial perspective but also from a confidence issue as well for those that have failed tests. I'm not content personally in the response from the department to say that those that fail their test in general are just not ready to take a test, and therefore if they had more time beforehand that they would be less likely to fail. I don't actually feel that is the prevailing thought on the issue, given the anecdotal evidence that I have from those that have contacted me on this issue. So I'm in members' hands. I know we did discuss the potential of a motion in relation to DVA. It is certainly an issue that the committee has given considerable attention to. So it's over to members if anyone else. I know Cahill has raised his hand.
Yeah, Chair, on two issues, but I'll deal with this now. I would support that. I think it's not acceptable. I mean, obviously we can get more stats in relation to it, but I think we'll give it a fair hearing, and I think it's time for, I would support a motion of some degree to be brought to the floor. So I think some of the response we're getting lately right across the board, but in this matter I would support a motion, Chair.
Okay, well, we can maybe give a thought to that, members, as to if members were agreed. I'll go to Andrew first. Sorry, I see his hand raised. If it's on this issue, Andrew, I know Cahill has a different issue to come in on, but if it's on this one...
Yeah, I have on this issue and another issue, which is why I put my hand up for the other issue, but I'll do that in relation to this. I think if we're going to bring a motion, we need to be clear what we're asking for, what's the call to action, and we also need to be conscious of Assembly plenary business is extremely congested at the moment in relation to legislation. So we just need to be conscious of that as well, but we need to have an understanding of what we're asking for in terms of the motion.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think probably a motion could be very specific in relation to this particular issue, but also indeed it could actually be wider as well, because obviously the committee has had considerable discussion surrounding backlogs in relation to DVA, not only with MOT testing but also with the driving test backlog. So we could make it issue specific, or we could be much broader regarding the difficulties and challenges facing DVA, where we could bring in a lot of these different issues. But I'm open to members' suggestions on that. I see Roy Beggs has indicated.
So someone generally goes forward for a test when they've had considerable number of lessons and experience, and yes, some people don't make the grade. That's where the test's there. But generally, they are close to passing when they do so. So I do have sympathies for if we can enact some mechanism where they can get a sooner test. I understand that. But I don't understand how we would have an hour and a half debate on that subject alone, because I think everybody's going to agree it. So if there's a way of widening it to other issues within DVA,
Okay.
such as there are still actually testing fewer vehicles in the last full month, where figures were published than any month during 2019 pandemic,
Okay.
other than December, which would have been shut off for holidays for a big period. So
We could widen.
there's something still wrong with the
Yeah.
testing, the number of vehicles that are being tested.
I would concur with that point, and I think probably what we could do is, the clerk has heard the comments from Mr. Beggs and indeed Andrew in terms of trying to find something that is issue specific, but indeed also maybe gets a fair hearing in plenary, because we do know the pressures it's facing. So perhaps we could look at a motion in relation to DVA which encapsulates what Roy suggested and indeed what Cathal and ourselves have raised in relation to that proposed reserve list, in relation to priority access to cancellations for those that have sat and failed their test. I'll go to the clerk now. Have you enough information to try to pull together something on that?
Certainly, Chair, I can draft something and send it out to members for their agreement or amendment,
Okay.
and then we should have something for next week for
Okay.
agreement.
Are members content with that action point? Great. Great. Thank you, members. Sorry, Cathal, you had another point you wanted
Yes,
to raise?
Chair,
and then
on
we'll come to Andrew.
on that same point, on 165 there, in relation to the plan, I just want to update to say, did the Minister go back to councils, or is officials engaging with councils in relation to the plan advice note that she had withdrawn, because she made a commitment that she would go back and deal with councils. So
Okay.
we'll get a wee update on that, on what
We can
engagement.
certainly ask for that one for an update. I'll go now to Andrew Muir, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just in relation to 5.8, which is implementation of the Reservoirs Act. I think it's been noted that it's in the forward work plan for officials to come in and give us a briefing on that. I just would like to add, it would be appreciated if part of that briefing, I think necessarily would have to be in private session, but I have a couple of queries in relation to current reservoirs and their status as well. So if that would be possible for officials to be able to facilitate that, I'm just flagging that up now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment. Absolutely. Okay, members, there's nobody else wishing to raise any issues in particular to the correspondence from the Minister of our last committee meeting. No, I don't see anybody else indicating. Okay. So we'll see then 5.11, which is Examiner of Statutory Rules, members to note, and indeed also 5.12, which is the Road Haulage Association to request a briefing. Is this something that members would suggest? We also have an issue as well, which may be useful for members to get an update from the department on. We could arrange a briefing with the Road Haulage Association, but also just to note that the first meeting of the Specialised Committee on Road Transport was held on Wednesday the 24th of November. The committee was established by the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. A DFI official attended as an observer. It may be an interest for to ask the department for the report on the meeting and any issues raised in particular interest to Northern Ireland. Are members content that we ask of that of the department? And would members be content that we try to arrange a meeting with the Road Haulage Association? Members agreed?
Yes, agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, members. We will now go
Chair,
on.
Andrew.
Sorry.
Chair, in relation to the Road Haulage Association, can I suggest we also invite Logistics UK alongside the Road Haulage Association?
I think that would be useful, Andrew. I think what we could do is potentially have... Sorry, there's a phone going. That's off now. I think what we could do is have a number of briefings on this from the different representative sectors on the day.
Yeah, Chair, just to check, I think we should broaden it out
Yeah.
and see whoever's...
I think that's a good
like
suggestion.
Seamus Leahy, and there's different
Yeah.
people's been in.
I know
here, of
others.
course.
I think the reason why they're specific is that they did reach out to whenever they were here in the building. I think the main issue was that they felt that they hadn't got an opportunity to brief the committee when they do know that others, such as Seamus Leahy and others, had the opportunity to brief the committee. So I think that's the reason why they've requested the opportunity to brief the committee. So members content?
Yeah.
Okay, members, thank you. Okay, we will now move on to Sorry, I'll actually bring members' attention to page 179. We've discussed that. We've agreed for an oral briefing. So members content with the actions as suggested in the correspondence memo. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay, agenda item number 6, which is the footway to the rear of Quadrant Place near Albert Street, Belfast. Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. I'll turn members' attention to page 181, the SL1. The proposal is subject to negative resolution procedure. The rule will abandon an area of footway on the western side of the Westlink, Belfast. The abandonment has been requested by Belfast City Council as part of an environmental improvement scheme, which will include a new pathway, outdoor sports facilities and general landscaping of the area. Following the abandonment, the area will be redeveloped for Department for Communities to create a new public amenity, and land ownership will transfer to Belfast City Council. The Department has consulted on the proposal and there have been no objections. I'm not aware of any objections to that. I don't know if members are in the room. I see Andrew's hand raised, and if it's maybe before I go on. No, haven't raised his hand. So I'm not aware of any objections to that, members. So I would ask, are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Are we content? Content? Thank you, members. Agenda item number 7, which is SL1, the regulation EC number 1370/2007, Public Services Obligations in Transport Amendment, EU Exit Northern Ireland Regulation 2021. Turn members' attention to the clerk's memo at 185 and at page 186, the SL1. At page 190, the response from Translic to the committee's request for information on the impact of the proposal. The proposal is subject to negative resolution. The purpose of the proposed regulations is to remove references to member states, EU law, the requirement to report to the European Commission, as well as to replace references to EU directives and regulations with their appropriate UK replacements. The Department advised that these amendments will ensure the retained EU regulation will operate effectively. The committee previously considered the policy proposals outlined in the SL1 at its meeting on the 20th of October 2021, when it agreed to write to Translink in relation to the practical implications of the proposal. That response has been received and states the proposed regulations do not propose a change in policy or the intentions of the law, and as such are technical in nature. There is officials available if required. So can I ask if members are content to move on, or questions to raise? I'll go to Roy Beggs first.
This is an area where regulation was brought in, I think it was October 2020. They were then withdrawn, and then there was another set brought in. I am unhappy with the reason that the original regulations were withdrawn. Apparently it was because there was potential state aid implications post-transition period in relation to future public service agreements with Translink. So I have not seen any reason why we should be deviating from the original draft of the regulations, similar to those that were brought in other parts of the UK.
Would you be content, Roy, if there's officials available to answer that question?
Okay.
So we do have officials available if needed, which is Jackie Robinson, Director of Public Transport Division, and Linda Buick, Public Transport Division. If they are attending online, could I ask someone to bring them into Spotlight? Okay, we have. Okay. Good morning, Linda, and good morning, Jackie. Can you hear us from the committee? I repeat, good morning, Linda and Jackie. Can you hear me from the committee?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, you're very welcome to committee this morning. We have a particular question in relation to the statutory rule, and I will go to Mr. Beggs again to ask the question.
I'm just trying to understand what was wrong with the original regulations that were brought in October 2020, over a year ago, which were subsequently withdrawn. The advice that has been given to us, I think it was by the Minister, was that there was potential for state aid implications post-transition period in relation to future public service agreement with Translink. Can you explain what was wrong with those original regulations? I don't understand why they would not be still acceptable.
Okay, Linda, do you want to answer that?
Yes, certainly. So at the time that those regulations were brought in, the advice had been that those regulations were needed to bring 1370 into domestic legislation. So that's why those regulations were brought in. At the time, it was missed that the regulation 1370 was captured within the NI protocol. So we, on advice received from the Department for Transport, at the time when the original regulation had been brought in, the Department for Transport had made a corresponding SI that covered England, Scotland and Wales. And the advice received from DFT had been that because Regulation 1370 was captured within the NI protocol, they would have revoked their regulation if it covered NI. And so the advice was that the department needed to revoke the statutory rule that was brought in October 2020 because it was captured under the NI protocol. So at that time, because it was captured under the NI protocol, the department revoked the statutory rule, and there was no guidance, I suppose, at that stage as to the NI protocol and how it would work in practice. So at that stage, because it was captured in the protocol, we were under of the understanding that 1370 would apply in all cases that the department would be awarding a PSA. So in January 2021, guidance was issued by the UK government in relation to state aid, in relation to the NI protocol, and in particular in relation to Article 10 of the protocol, which is the article under which 1370 is captured. So that guidance has been continuously updated, and the end result of that guidance was that it clarified what the scope of Article 10 was. And the scope of Article 10, instead of as we understood it, would apply to every time that we were bringing in a PSA, the guidance, the scope of Article 10 is limited to only to those cases where there is going to be an effect on trade in goods captured by the protocol. So also under the protocol, there is a list of goods that are captured under Annex 2. So if the PSA is deemed to have an effect on those goods captured under Annex 2, then the PSA will come under the NI protocol. But if it doesn't have an impact on those trade in goods, then it doesn't come under the protocol. And that is why we need this other means to award the PSA. So that's why it was revoked in the first place, because at the time there was no guidance as to the extent of Article 10 and what it actually meant. Now that we have received that guidance, the advice is that Article 10, the scope is very, very limited to only those times when a PSA will affect trade in goods. And when it doesn't affect trade in goods, then we need another means to award the PSA to TransLink, and this statutory rule will be the other means through which we will award the PSA to TransLink. So that's why we need the two versions of it. And I suppose at the time, if we knew more about the protocol and what it meant and the scope of Article 10, then we wouldn't have revoked the statutory rule at that stage. But like I said, the guidance only was issued in January, and it's kind of continually updated as we kind of the practical implications of the protocol were kind of understood a bit more.
Can you explain what public service agreements with passenger transfers with TransLink has got to do with the trade in goods? Where is the interaction? I'm just curious why state aid rules has anything to do with TransLink.
Yes. So if TransLink had a contract in place, so TransLink has the powers to carry or store goods on behalf of a company. So if TransLink was storing goods on behalf of a company and was given them favourable conditions, was storing goods at a cheaper rate and was given them an economic advantage over a manufacturer in the Republic, say, that's where the effect on trade in goods would come into play. So it is, it is kind of, difficult to understand exactly, because look, this is for public transport services, and, where does the trade in goods come into? But it's because TransLink has the power to carry or store goods as part of their power. So that's kind of where we need to consider it. Are they using those powers to carry or store goods? And if so, what are the goods that they are carrying or storing? And are those goods captured under the protocol? And is there likely to be any state aid implications for those contracts that are in place? So every time we're awarding a PSA to TransLink, we would just need to consider what contracts do they have in place in relation to storing or carrying goods, and are those likely to have state aid implications, in by giving a competitive advantage, through those contracts, and so there could be a leakage of state aid in that regard.
Again, my understanding, TransLink does not operate rail freight. So are we talking about the odd parcel that might be put on a bus or a train? What goods are we talking about? It just seems to be a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Yeah. Well, I suppose at the minute, TransLink don't have any contracts in place, in relation to goods. So they don't come under 1370 as it flows into NI law under the protocol. So because they have no contracts in place, we need this SR to be able to award the new PSA to TransLink. So it is very likely, depending on, kind of what future contracts TransLink have, is that they would never need to be awarded a PSA under the NI protocol. Every PSA that they would be awarded would be under the statutory rule that is in front of the committee to agree. It's only, like I said, if they did have a contract in place. At the minute, there's no such contracts in place. We don't know what will happen in the future. So potential that maybe, there might be something that would impact trade in goods and would need to award a PSA under the protocol, but it's more likely that every PSA would be awarded under the statutory rule that's in front of the committee today.
Sure.
I'll come to you in a moment.
I just remain concerned that we're dealing with public service agreements, and limitations have been put into it in terms of the Northern Protocol.
Yeah, share those concerns. Cathal Boylan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Linda. Linda, basically what you're saying, you're just creating a regulation there in case in future the opportunity arises for this to happen. Is that what you're saying?
We are creating the statutory rule because although Regulation 1370 is what we need to award the PSA to TransLink. That's the EU legislation that says that we must have a contract in place with TransLink if we need them to deliver public transport services. So it's under the NI protocol, but we can only use it under the NI protocol if there is an effect in trade in goods. There is no effect in trade in goods with TransLink at the minute, so we need the statutory rule to be able to award them the PSA. So in fact, the statutory rule is most likely be the one that we will always award a PSA to TransLink. The other one is maybe just in case that they have a contract in place that we would award it under the NI protocol. So this one, the statutory rule is the one that we're most likely to award a public service agreement to TransLink under.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, I see no further questions. Anybody have a final question for the officials before we decision? Okay, no. Okay, thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll bring other members up into the spotlight. Okay, members, we heard the briefing from the officials, and the commentary is on note. Our members, I'll now move to the official question to the committee. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rule?
Continue to reserve my position.
Sorry.
Continue to reserve my position on this.
Yes, I would concur with Mr. Beggs, but I think that members are, I'm saying that in terms of numbers, are content with the statutory rule.
Content, Chair.
And I think there's a majority. Okay, thank you, members. We'll now move to agenda item number 8, which is subordinate legislation. ASRs not subject to Assembly proceedings. Can I advise members that there are 4 statutory rules not subject to Assembly proceedings. There has been no change to policy content since the ASL1s were considered by the committee on the 10th of November, and members were content to note. At page 192, SR 2021-306, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles, Amendment Number 8 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 196, SR 2021-307, the Roads Speed Limit, Northern Ireland I'll say that again. The 307, the Roads Speed Limit Number 2 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 200, SR 2021-308, the Road Speed Limit Number 3 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. And at page 205, SR 2021-309, Road Races Target Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Can I advise members to note that the statutory rules, unless they have any issues to raise on the proposals? Are members content with the statutory rules? Content. Thank you, members. Can we now move to agenda item number 9, which is SR 2021-305, the taxis, taxi meters, devices and maximum fares amendment regulation, Northern Ireland 2021. Turn members' attention to the clerk's memo at page 212 and at page 213, the statutory rule. Tabled at page 2, correspondence for the department advising of its intention to commence the statutory rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 17th of November 2021 and was content. There have been no change to policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. The rule is subject to negative resolution. Are members content with this rule? We have a indication.
Yeah, Chair, I'm content, but just want to note, obviously, as part of the conversation, we note that some drivers were dissatisfied with.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, just for noting it.
Yep, that's happy to note that. So are members content with this rule?
Content.
Okay. So I will read the following motion: that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2021-305, the taxis, taxi meters, devices and maximum fares amendment regulations, Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Okay. Members, we will now move to agenda item number 10, which is SR 2021-310, the Rockfield Park Portaferry Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 225, the statutory rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 10th of November 2021 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Content? So I'll read the following motion: that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered the SR 2021-310, the Rockfield Park Portaferry Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Great. Members, we'll now move to agenda item number 11, which is a departmental briefing on the outcome of the October monitoring and an update on the 2022 to 2025 budget. I'll turn members' attention to page 233 in the clerk's memo and the department briefing at 238, and we will now welcome to the committee. I'll give them a time to take a seat. Okay, you're all very welcome. So can I welcome formally to the committee this morning Mr. Declan McGowan, Deputy Secretary of Resources, Governance and EU, Susan Anderson, Director of Finance, Dr. Andrew Murray, Deputy Secretary of Roads and River. You're all very, very welcome to the committee this morning. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you all for a presentation, which will follow then questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to brief the committee today. I welcome the chance to update members on the department's in-year budget position and the bids submitted as part of the Budget 22-25 information gathering exercise. I'm joined today by Andrew Murray, Deputy Secretary, Roads and Rivers, and Susan Anderson, Finance Director. Turning firstly to in-year resource budget position, the Minister set out the serious financial challenges facing the department in a letter to the committee on the 5th of November. The unprecedented rise in the inescapable costs of energy is having an understandable and significant impact on businesses, public bodies and households. It also has an impact on the cost of running our street lighting network, traffic signs and signals. The impact on Northern Ireland Water, which is the biggest consumer of electricity here, is, however, particularly significant. For Northern Ireland Water, the increase in inescapable energy costs since September is 29.8 million. To put this into context, this represents 22% of Northern Ireland Water's entire resource budget for the full financial year. Given that energy prices are continuing to rise, the unfunded pressures were estimated to be 78 million following the outcome of the October monitoring. While we will seek to bid as part of January monitoring, it is clear that this level of cost increase cannot be absorbed without serious consequences and major impacts if additional funding cannot be secured. Members will appreciate that it is a fundamental requirement that departments must live within the resource budgets provided to them and must plan to do so. Therefore, given the scale of the unfunded pressures, we have carried out a rigorous contingency planning exercise to explore every possible option to reduce expenditure to address those genuinely inescapable pressures which remain, and particularly to ensure that every effort is made to preserve drinking water supplies. As part of that process, we have identified reduced requirements across the department, totalling 2.7 million. This funding has already been reallocated to Northern Ireland Water to mitigate the unfunded pressures. Northern Ireland Water itself has also taken action to cut back on costs where it can, and along with a higher forecast income, it has identified 1.6 million of savings. While the department in Northern Ireland will take every possible step to protect drinking water provision, loss of service cannot be ruled out, for example in supply restrictions, interruptions and possibly drinking water quality at the top if further funding is not found. Within the department itself, there remains around 6 million of unfunded pressures. Contingency measures are currently under consideration by the Minister, but given the scale of pressures, implementing such measures will inevitably have an impact on service delivery. Furthermore, the department is also engaging with TransLink on the impact of not receiving any additional funding at October monitoring and the impact that this has on the reserves for the company. Turning to capital, members will be aware that we did not bid or declare any reduced requirements at October monitoring for capital. This was due to the ongoing uncertainty around delivery of the complex A6 flagship scheme and legal challenges on structural maintenance. Work is ongoing to assess the position in advance of the last monitoring round of this financial year, and we will of course provide a full briefing on the capital position as part of the January monitoring round briefing. Turning to future years and budget 23 to 25, the committee will have noted the bids submitted by the department both for resource and capital. The resource bids, of which 117 million, 92.5 million and 103.2 million are inescapable across the budget period, and they are essential to ensure the continuation of many basic public services, including the adequate provision of water and wastewater services and public transport. The department also identified a number of high priority bids, 27.8 million, 34.9 million and 55 million across the budget period. On the capital front, the total capital requirements identified by the department across the budget period, excluding city deals, was 787.3 million, 1,017.7 million, 1,403.6 million. Of these requirements, 546.2 million, 652.4 million and 880.4 million across the budget period is required simply to meet the department's existing contractual commitments, including flagship schemes. In the absence of an agreed programme for government and investment strategy, these requirements are reflective of the Minister's priorities, the Executive's NDA commitments, Executive's COVID recovery plan and the climate change agenda. Depending on the outcome for DFI, it is anticipated that a balance will need to be struck between maintaining existing infrastructure in water and sewage, public transport, the road network and flood alleviation on one hand, while investing in new development on the other. A draft budget is expected to be announced in the coming weeks, which will likely be followed by a 12-week consultation period. Following this, final budgets will be agreed and individual ministers will then make decisions on departmental allocations. In closing, it is important to reiterate that, as always, the Minister is very keen to get the Committee's views and support in shaping and delivering improvements to people's everyday lives, and she welcomes your constructive challenge and input. I hope that our discussion today will help the Committee understand better the challenges that the Department faces and the seriousness of the in-year financial position that will likely require very difficult decisions in the coming weeks. Thank you. Susan, Andrew and I will be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And I suppose I want to just firstly say to the committee that it's suggested that the committee firstly question officials on the October monitoring round and then undertake a further round of questioning on the 2022 to 25 budget. So if members to begin with, we'll do a round in relation to the October monitoring round. Thank you very much, Declan, for your presentation. I suppose probably the highlight figure for us is obviously a bid of 76 million, an allocation of 6 million. There's quite a difference. So I suppose probably first and foremost from the committee's perspective is, obviously there's an outline of the pressures involved, etc., and it's quite a considerable bid, and particularly probably surrounding NI Water. And we do take note the Finance Minister's comments in the October monitoring round, as that he will take note of that in a January monitoring round. But in relation to the proposed risk now, in relation to that urgent funding required, what sort of risk are we talking about? What level of risk, and could you give us more detail?
I think, Chair, it's not overstating it, and particularly in relation to Northern Ireland Water, to say the risks are high, huge in the weeks ahead. We are, at the moment, as a department, trying to get enough funding available to make sure that we can get through to the next monitoring round in January. That has been a challenge for us, and as I said in my opening remarks, we've had to reallocate some savings within the department to help contribute towards that. But as we go into the January monitoring, it's crucial, it's critical that we do get the funding for the remainder of the year. If we don't, what we're talking about is potentially having to look at whether or not we can provide wastewater to homes, schools, farms, etc. It's that serious an issue for us. So it's important that we get the money in the January monitoring.
And how confident are you as a department that you will receive the money?
I couldn't say. There are a number of competing priorities, and they're well documented: health, education, and others. So it just depends on the process and the executive decisions that they take. But certainly, looking at it from an official perspective, we certainly need to get that money. Otherwise, we will be in very difficult situation come January. We've already engaged with the civil contingency team in the executive office to look at what plans we need to put in place if the funding isn't there.
Well, given the Minister of Finance's commentary surrounding that particular on NI Water, I'm sure there's an increased level of confidence that something like this will be forthcoming. Has there been any further conversations with Department for Infrastructure officials and Department of Finance officials in relation to this matter?
We continue to talk to DOF officials and to highlight the case. They are alive to it and they understand and appreciate the circumstances we feel. We also, through the Civil Contingency Network, have made other departments aware just about the criticality of this and the need to have funding in place because of the knock-on effects to other services provided by other government departments. So I don't know if you want to say
No, that's exactly it. We have worked very closely with officials in DOF just to make them aware of the pressures that NI Water is currently facing, to make them aware of the funding that we've found internally, again, to allocate to NI Water, and the savings that NI Water has been able to make themselves. So we're keeping them very much up to date in terms of the pressure that still remains, and they're fully aware then of the seriousness of the situation as well.
Okay. The department states that the outcome results in significant inescapable pressures which have continued to increase due to rising energy costs since bids were submitted in early October. The department states that current residual pressures are now estimated to be, as I have stated, 76 million. Prior to October monitoring, residual pressures were estimated to be 76 million. The table in Annex A shows the residual pressures to be at 70 million. Have residual pressures increased by 8 million since the table at Annex A was produced?
The short answer is the rise in energy costs continues and therefore the pressures rise. But Susan, if you want to go into more detail.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So since we submitted our bids as part of October monitoring, energy costs have continued to rise above what we had anticipated whenever we put the bids in. And again, we're expecting that they may increase a bit further as well. So again, we're engaging very closely with colleagues, particularly in roads and rivers, on the street lighting energy costs, for example, and traffic lights. There's energy costs rising there as well, along with NI Water, just to make sure that we're fully aware of what the current pressures are.
So an increase of 8 million is quite significant in that short period of time, and would you say that is predominantly due to energy costs, and if not, what other factors would be at play there, and indeed also which policy areas are most affected?
Yeah, so it is due to energy costs. Just to be clear, that is purely due to energy costs increasing. Okay, and particular sectors that are most affected by that? Yeah, so it's NI Water, and then on roads and rivers in relation to street lighting and traffic signals as well. Those are the key areas. and NI Water's the biggest consumer of energy here in Northern Ireland as well. So that's why it's a really significant impact for NI Water.
Okay. In relation to TransLink, the Minister states that as funding has not been provided to address the pressures submitted in respect of public transport, TransLink will be required to use a significant amount of its reserves, which will reduce the financial resilience of the organisation and impact on its going concern status. That is a major concern for its board and for the department. This was the Minister that stated this. So can I ask what risks are associated with TransLink that they didn't receive the financial backing that was required?
Okay, well, I mean, from the outset, when you look back to the beginning of the COVID outbreak, TransLink was losing fares because less people were obviously using public transport, and therefore put a lot of pressure on them as we come into this financial year. They had reserves that were supported by money that was directed to them last year, and they've used those reserves to keep things moving. But while the numbers are increasing on people who are using public transport, have been since the summer, there's no guarantee, given recent discoveries of new variants, etc., that those numbers will continue to rise, and therefore there is a pressure as we go into the last quarter of this financial year that the generated income for TransLink will not be enough to keep it going. What does that mean? It means then it eats into its reserves, and as it eats into those reserves, there comes a tipping point that TransLink then are at a position where the board members may feel that they can no longer carry out their fiduciary duties, and therefore they might need to look at what drastic action might need to be taken to do that. What that looks like is entirely for the board to consider and in conjunction with us as a department. But we are looking at a possibility that the reserves will be run down as we go towards the end of this financial year.
Okay, and finally from myself in relation to contingency planning, so the department states that it is undertaking a rigorous contingency planning exercise to ensure that every step possible is taken to preserve drinking water supplies. It goes on to state that it is inevitable that without additional funding there will be service reductions in other areas. So whenever politicians hear the threat towards drinking water supplies, obviously that's quite a serious concern. I suppose what I want to get to the bottom of, is this a form of scaremongering in words, or how serious is this issue? And maybe you may wish to elaborate on the type and the detail and scope of the contingency planning in more detail to the committee.
Okay, well, I'll go first, and then if Susan can pick up any of the detail. But the short answer is this is not hyperbole. This is a very real position. We've been through it in quite detailed discussions with our colleagues in Northern Ireland Water. Northern Ireland Water, the system is powered by electricity and needs that throughput of electricity to keep everything going. They're looking and planning ahead on almost a week-by-week basis to see how much money they need. And we have actually calculated that we are working on a week-by-week basis of how far we can get to before we literally run out of money for Northern Ireland Water. What does that mean? That means they then have to look at supplies that then need to be turned either down or off. And our understanding is that you can't just turn supplies down. It actually, because they are wastewater plants, etc., they actually need to be turned off. And therefore, you're getting into the realms of making choices of where you turn those off, or do you turn them off as right across the region. So it's that kind of nature we're in. It's not overstating it. It is factual, and at the moment, where indications are that we may get to about the first week of January with a clear wind with the money that we found to date. But after that, there's so much uncertainty, which is why we've invoked the civil contingency process. And what that means is that we are working with colleagues across all departments to look at what this might mean and how they need to prepare themselves, because there could be, I'm not saying there would be, but there could be a position if we don't get the money in January monitoring that we would have to, Northern Ireland Water would have to write out to people who receive the services to say there is no guarantee that you will have a water supply come the new year. And that's a very real possibility at the moment where we sit today. So not to reassure you, to be clear, Chair, this is not overstating it, this is the position we face. So what we're trying to do is look at what things we can do within the department to contribute to savings to help. But as you know, most of our services are services that are statutory provisions right across Northern Ireland, such as winter service, etc. So it's very hard to turn anything off to provide funding for the pressures that Northern Ireland Water face. So unless we get that money through January monitoring, we are in a very difficult position.
It's quite concerning to hear that, bleak picture in relation to NI water, and particularly in the Christmas period, and we know the pressures that are placed on NI water with other factors as well at that time of the year. The civil contingencies obviously is something that I'm keen to hear more about in relation to interaction with other departments. What sort of contingencies are we talking about, and essentially to ensure that NI water can continue to function? What other areas are being considered for reductions?
At this stage, I mean, unless you actually get the money, you can't keep the service going. So the discussions with other departments at this point has been very much about, we need to prepare ourselves for the potential implications. It's not that another department can in any way come in to help us unless they give us funding. So, you know, it's very much conversations about, you need to be aware that there is the potential, for example, for schools or for hospitals, etc., that you may be contacted to be told that there may not be a guaranteed water supply in the new year. So it's about making sure they're alive to that they're preparing their contingency planning for that, and that everything's in place in the event that might happen.
But my goodness, surely you're not saying here at the committee today that in the midst of where we are with COVID-19 that our hospitals may be impacted by water supply as a result of budgetary pressures with NI water?
All I can say is that Northern Ireland Water provide water services to hospitals, schools, etc. Without the funding, they can't provide the water supply. So by extension, yes, we are saying that it would be difficult to say with any certainty that there would be a guaranteed water supply to hospitals, schools, etc. in the new year without additional funding.
But in relation to how that is scaled up through the line, if we do have pressures, surely to goodness hospitals and schools are an absolute last resort, and all efforts must be made to ensure that those services are unaffected in what is already a difficult time. I would imagine that's basic planning within the department to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Absolutely, and it would be planning as well through the contingency plans that Northern Ireland Water would have. But you have to remember that the reservoirs just feed the water through the pipes and into the homes and the hospitals and things like that. So it's not a case of you can actually, you know, stave off and say, well, we'll direct this water straight to the hospitals. You have to keep the plant going or not, basically. And once you take the decision that it's not affordable to do it, the plant itself stops, and therefore the provision of water stops.
Given the importance of ensuring efficient and effective expenditure of public money, is the contingency planning that's going on not something that every department should be doing as a matter of course to ensure efficient and effective spending of public money?
Yeah, I can pick up on that one, if that's okay. Yeah, and certainly all departments will do that. You know, we have another monitoring round coming up as part of January monitoring, so all departments will be reviewing, as we will be, budget position to see what reduced requirements can be released to the centre then for executive decisions on reallocations. Now, we've already internally, as Declan has already said, we've gone through sort of stage one of the process to identify reduced requirements, potentially where we maybe can't spend as much as we thought we would have done in certain areas, or maybe where there's been a bit of slippage, and that's how we've identified the 2.7 million which have allocated to NI Water as a step one. And then we're also going through the remaining areas of our budgets just to see if there's any other areas that could potentially be stopped. But as members will be aware, so much of our budget is actually already committed because it's inescapable through contractual commitments as well. So we're doing everything that we can to make sure we don't get into the position that worst case scenario. And again, we're continuing to engage with DOF around the need for the funding. So we're coming at it from a couple of different angles, but just reinforcing that need for that extra funding to be secured.
Okay, and before I move on to members, just in relation to the hospitals and schools point that has been raised, I think as a committee I would like to be seeing some more information as to what contingency plans are put in place, particularly to ensure that those services are unaffected, particularly in that difficult period post-Christmas, because I'm sure that the level of planning that's went into this will be looking at ways in which those services are unaffected. So I would like that point taken away, that we do get more information on the particulars surrounding hospitals and schools. Okay, I'll move to members, so I have quite a list, so I'll go to the Deputy Chair first.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if there's many questions left now or not, but I've covered most of mine anyway. But you're very welcome, folks. Is there any good news out there at all? There's no money tree anywhere in or anything like that. It's certainly a very concerning situation that the committee faces this morning, and you haven't brought us good news at all, and it is concerning where we sit at the moment. And depending on what may or may not happen in January. I suppose one area which is ongoing is the COVID situation, and in previous times there was monitoring money came out for various departments and that, and there were special payments made and various things like that. The pandemic is nowhere near finishing. It could be actually, it could get worse again if we move forward and whatnot and stuff. How is that impacting upon the day-to-day running, particularly of public services which you've outlined there? How are they coping in the COVID situation with no additional funding which had been available before?
Well, it's certainly creating pressures. I mean, I've already outlined the TransLink impacts insofar as, you know, what they will generate by way of passenger fares versus what their running costs are. There's a huge gap there between that.
Sorry, Dr. It's in my head. There's also the pressures of maintaining the staff.
Yep.
I would know a number of people on the ground on TransLink there, and a number of them are off with COVID and whatnot and stuff. So there's potentially not just the income of fares, but there's the additional overtime to maintain the services as well. So it's coming a couple of different angles on the COVID situation, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think across the region we're seeing a rise in the number of people who are getting COVID and having to take time off, so that obviously will have impacts, and we're no different insofar as the services we provide. We manage it at the moment, and what we're trying to do is ensure that, you know, we organise workloads, etc., and work with the service providers that we work with, such as Northern Water, TransLink and DVA and others, to make sure that staff are there to provide the service. But yeah, it's the world that we're all living in at the moment, unfortunately.
And just on the day-to-day maintenance, I think Susan yourself mentioned that in relation to lighting, things like that, and the maintaining lighting. And so when I say anybody driving in here this morning in that weather will have seen probably flooding where they've never seen flooding before. So I know there's cutbacks in services there, and I know the Minister came into the office promising people the bread and butter stuff would be high on her agenda to maintain these services. But again, with no additional funding and from this monitoring around, the likes of the winter service, how are we going to get through? Is that under threat as well?
Okay, so in relation to winter service specifically, so within the opening budget baseline we had 3 million, and then we were allocated 4 million at October monitoring. So the average cost of a winter service would be around 7 million. So obviously we've got that funding at the moment, right, but that's heavily dependent on the weather situation as that unfolds, which is outside of our control. But we've got 7 million, which should get us through an average winter. I don't know, Andrew, if there's anything further that you'd like to add?
No, the money for winter service was ring-fenced, and my understanding is that we would need to go to the Department of Finance to get a special approval if we wanted to take money out of winter service and put it into something else. The £7 million would fund us for an average winter. Just yesterday, I got the Met Office's 3-monthly update, and there was nothing particularly out of the ordinary in that. In fact, the indications for the next 3 months are that while there might be some adverse events over the period of the 3 months, it's more likely to be slightly milder than normal for the winter than it is to be colder for the winter. So there's a better likelihood that it'll be milder and average precipitation. So it's so basically fairly average is what we're expecting for the next 3 months at least.
Thanks, Andrew. Any tips on a white Christmas or anything?
That would look unlikely for a white Christmas.
Okay. I just find sure, like yourself, I would share the concerns that we would see as priority of the hospitals and that. And I do understand it just can't be turned off at a certain point or turned on at a certain. If a region has to be supplied water or not supplied water, and there's a hospital there, we're in danger of letting those people down. So again, share your concerns on that situation. That is grave. There's absolutely no doubt about it at all. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And while this committee recognises that there's considerable remit for the Minister and the Department, one thing that's outside of your control is certainly the weather. So we can't hold you to account on that one. Could I go now to Cara Hunter, please, for a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Declan, Susan and Andrew for being here this morning. You're very welcome. The Chair has actually raised a number of my concerns. I share wholeheartedly the concern around schools and hospitals. I think they're absolute priority, but also in our briefings and this morning you touched on the consequences with financial pressure on things like wastewater and pollution. So I'm just wondering if you could touch on a little bit more about that, and also from a financial perspective, just any conversations that you've had with the Department of Finance. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, as regards wastewater, you will know a number of months ago the utility regulator made a determination on the price control for the next period, five plus years, and had identified an amount of money that was needed, just over $2 billion. That included within that funding needed for wastewater. So this year, actually, prior to the issues with energy costs, this was the first year that in a long time, the first year of the price control was fully funded by a minister. So that was great news, and that allows us to plan ahead with a bit more certainty, particularly on the capital side. Regarding waste, there's over 100 areas that are near or above capacity level at wastewater treatment works, and Northern Water is fully funded to remove 49 of these areas from constraint. There are projects in the pipeline, if you pardon the pun, Belfast, Kinnegher, Green Island and Newry, and the amounts associated with each of those in order are 126 million, 108 million, 33 million and 27 million. So there's money been set aside for that through the capital side to look at that in future years, and so we're alive to it. So hopefully that will diminish any concerns you might have in that area.
Thank you very much, and I just note the concern just around the loss of services, and the Chair had touched on with like drinking water supply and things like that. I just wonder, maybe a clerk can help advise, would it be possible to have a proposal just to write perhaps to the Department of Finance, just given the kind of major impacts that we'll see on our public services? And also I know other members have touched on the issues with TransLink that we could potentially see. So I'm just wondering, is that a possibility, or how would other members feel just given the dire situation that we're facing?
Sorry, Cara, but we will have an opportunity at the end of the briefing if there is specific proposals, so we'll come back to you at that stage. This is just an opportunity in relation to questions at the moment, so we will come back to you for that.
No worries, thank you very much.
Does anybody, any official need to come back in relation to any of your comments, Cara? Are you content with that?
No, I'm content. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to Cathal Boylan.
Of a background to October monitoring.
Still on October monitoring.
Okay. Thanks for all the Christmas cheer there, Declan. Don't go out as Ebenezer. You're not leaving as Ebenezer Scrooge. It's grand. Listen, we see the challenge we face, and I mean, obviously, and I know some of the questions have been asked before. We've met the winter on the gritting, funding the bid for the, and you've explained it's no different from any other year yet. Now, but my question would be, but surely then, in terms of the energy costs, because of the lightning, that. You know what I mean? That's telling the factor, would it not be? Or is that built into the original bid?
No, so we have increasing energy costs. So again, yes, we will be looking as part of January monitoring to see whether or not they've increased again. And we're current indications are that they are continuing to increase, and we'll factor that in then to the January monitoring bid position as well.
So you, when you made the original bid, it was on what's happening now, but you've increased that because people, when they look at winter services, they just think about gritting, but it's not. There's a lot of other services included in that, and I think as the energy costs certainly. They are growing, there's no doubt about it. That's going to be an issue for us. So, as long as that's bid in. Just in general, in terms of, and it was interesting because I was going to ask about the PC21, but I'm going to go back to it now because there was the PC21 that's been allocated. In terms of the COVID pressures, I mean, can you roughly say what percentage pressure that would be, or have you worked that out yet? I mean, because I know it was wastewater, which is slightly different, but. In terms of what PC21 has given for the year, then the added costs of energy costs plus then COVID pressures as well, can you tell us what percentage of it?
The price control determination is done by the utility regulator, and it's done over a period of time and at a period of time, and it's quite a complex almost econometric type model to develop what they feel are the key priorities and cost those out. So they would have been done at a point in time. That point in time preceded this surge in energy costs, and actually you could also argue the upsurge in COVID cases. So at that time, that was based on the best known information at the time, and the understanding was that it would be 2.1 billion would be needed during the next period of the price control. So all of that was done on the science at that point in time. So it probably didn't, well, it couldn't have foreseen the rise in energy costs or anything like that were coming in the autumn.
And I'm just saying that on average, have we got an idea or an indication what the overall increase would be in percentage terms with the energy costs and the pressures of COVID? Well,
we're seeing that the energy costs have, for Northern Water are actually doubling in this year, roughly, and that's a rough estimate. But on what they would have expected it to be, and at the time of the utility regulator's determination versus what it's looking like it's going to be now, it's in around 60 million. I don't have the exact figure at hand. But it's double really what they would have expected when they were doing the determination and finalised the determination back in.
Double, right? Because I understand that some of the questions we asked for. Just obviously my final question, in terms of TransLink reserves, I mean, because we know last year we topped up the reserves. Right. So how critical now is it, in percentage-wise? What are we looking at? Can you indicate?
Well, probably not.
I know they're facing challenges.
Yeah.
What I mean, as a role of scrutiny committee, I'm just, we have supported most bids, and we understand there's challenges right across each department, but it's our responsibility. I just know that, just in terms of percentage terms, the challenge that lie with TransLink now, you're saying about the tipping point, how close are we, or where are we at?
I'll give you it in numerical terms rather than percentage. Just,
okay, yeah, no, sorry, okay, that's fair enough. We'll not argue over that now.
Okay, what we're looking at is, when you start from first principles, that we wouldn't have bid for additional funding for TransLink had they not have absolutely needed it, and they absolutely did, and we bid for in around 41 million. We got nothing, and therefore you can see straight away that that's going to have an impact. The reserves will deplete, they obviously will, and at the moment they're sitting in and around, I think around 35 million, I think is the most recent figure, or in and around that figure. Their tipping point, if it goes down another 10 million, I think is the tipping point, and therefore once you get close to 25 million, which can happen very quickly, then you're getting into the pressure of whether or not the organisation can function normally. So the figures, the reserves were there. They have started to run down. They needed an extra 41 million. They didn't get anything, and therefore they are literally eating into their reserves now. And the tipping point, doesn't look that far away when you look at 35 million to 25 million. So it's just really how much will there be uptake in public transport in the remainder of this financial year, etc., to be factored into that. And if that's low, that's going to have an impact.
And just final point, Chair, because you mentioned the contingency planning. And I appreciate you mentioned about the schools and the hospitals, but certainly in any contingency plan would be to protect on those most vulnerable and those services. So, we can say certainly would share concerns, but that would be part of the contingency to make sure those services, are secured. To be honest, So,
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the Christmas, Jeremy. No problem. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Go to Andrew Muir, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the officials for coming along. 1st of December, not much Christmas cheer, but anyway, hopefully we'll be able to find some positivity in the next bit in terms of the budget for the next 3 years. Just a couple of questions. In relation to the Northern Ireland water situation, the situation you have outlined is very serious, and obviously there's a need to ensure that the financial support is provided to Northern Ireland Water. 2 questions really in relation to that. Was the Executive aware and the Department of Finance originally in terms of the impact if this monitoring round bid wasn't met, and the implications as you have outlined this morning in terms of determining that monitoring round in October?
Short answer is that our Minister had made the Executive aware of that, yes, that there were going to be consequences if we didn't get the funding, yeah.
Okay, and the consequences were as outlined here this morning?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, okay. Right, and did the Minister agree the monitoring round in the Executive?
She is part of the Executive. The Executive agreed to the budget, yes.
Okay. The other issue is just in relation to the situation with regards to these additional energy costs. Other organisations haven't felt this, but Northern Ireland Water have. Can you outline maybe the reasons for that and why Northern Ireland Water weren't able to buy ahead in terms of energy costs, where other organisations have been able to hedge their costs, particularly in, for example, fuel or electricity or gas?
Yes, Northern Ireland Water. Just get the exact information, but they would have planned ahead and engaged with energy suppliers at a point in time. But obviously, in the months that have followed, that there has been an significant increase in the cost of energy costs. So no one could have predicted this. So at the point in time that they were looking and planning ahead for their energy costs, Northern Ireland Water would not have been aware of this huge surge.
Okay, so but most organisations, Declan, buy ahead and hedge in terms of energy costs. Why did Northern Ireland Water not do that?
Northern Ireland Water do buy ahead. I'm just trying to see if I have the exact detail here. I don't know, Susan, if you have it. But they do buy ahead. I don't have the exact information to hand, but I certainly know they do buy ahead at a period in time, and I think that period of time was during the early part of this calendar year, so it would have been long before this had happened. I suspect other service providers also are facing the same problems that we are. It's just the scale is so much bigger for Northern Ireland Water, given that it is the biggest user of electricity in the region.
Yeah, I think if
so
I could
you've
maybe
outlined that there's a, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add, NI Water did tender most recently back in May 21 for energy procurement, and clearly at that time we had no indication of what was going to happen with energy prices, so that's been a key issue just around the timing of that, and again they'll be looking around fixing it that wasn't available back in the time that the contract was originally set, and some of that will be considered commercial in confidence actually as well. So there's probably limited information that we can give out today on that. And also just to put in context, I think the energy costs represent 22% of NI Water's overall budget resource position. So it's clearly a significant amount comparative to the overall budget position. So again, there's limited room to manoeuvre whenever we've got pressures of that scale facing NI Water.
Susan, can I also just check, did you want to make a point about the executive agreement? Was there something you wanted to raise there?
I know.
No, okay, sorry.
No, okay, and just in relation to this, there's been outlined that the financial security needs to be given from the beginning of January. The January monitoring round is possible it may not be agreed to the end of January. October monitoring round wasn't agreed until the end of October. How critical is that in terms of the timing of the January monitoring round?
It's extremely critical. What we've done is we have engaged with Northern Ireland Water to say to them, based on what you have now, what is the last point in time where you run out of money, so to speak, and we've worked that out almost to the week, and it's in the early part of January. So where we sit today, based on what we have by way of finances, we're looking at probably the second week of January, and as you rightly say, October monitoring is not likely to be known probably towards 20th plus of January. So there is that period in between that we need to look at how we might close that gap.
Okay. In terms of the contingency planning, does that extend beyond civil contingencies, or what was the extent of that contingency planning?
Well, what we through the contingency plan network within the civil service, we're working with other departments, but we have a water stakeholders group is due to meet next week, and that'll have on it people such as the utility regulator, Consumer Council, and others, where we will be going through the issues that we are facing and discuss where we go next on that. So that's due to happen next week.
No problem. Just in relation to TransLink, obviously, you've outlined the situation there. If there isn't a further financial allocation in January, does the issue in terms of TransLink being able to trade as a going concern then arise?
There will certainly be implications for them, and it depends on whether there's a huge uptake in public transport. And we always talk about the fact that we want to move to decarbonisation and support public transport. And I think we do need to almost back that. We do need to back that financially. And as we said at the moment, TransLink are living on their reserves, so to speak, unless there is a rise in consumer uptake in the weeks ahead. So it will take them down close to that, depending on what happens between now and the end of this financial year. Yeah.
Okay, because I just think from my perspective, we talk about the need to safeguard the health of the people of Northern Ireland, and a part of that is about clean drinking water and being able to operate wastewater treatment plants. So this is absolutely critical for the health of our people, and also in relation to TransLink. COP26 was only recently held, and we were talking about the need to address the climate crisis that we're facing. So to be able to sustain public transport provision in Northern Ireland is of critical importance. And the reason I'm asking this is that if January monitoring doesn't come forward with funding for TransLink, then we have a potential, what I'm reading from yourself, is that the potential for TransLink not to be able to trade as a going concern, which has significant implications for that organisation. So it's really an understanding that I'm reading from yourself, that unless there's a significant increase in bus and rail passengers, that's likely to materialise if there isn't further funding allocated in January monitoring.
I think that's a fair summary, yeah. I mean, they do need to be financially supported to get through to the end of the financial year. Otherwise, they do eat into their reserves and there is a tipping point.
Okay.
Yeah. Just one last question, Chair. There's currently unallocated capital DEL and also FTC funding in this financial year. Departments haven't bid for it and it's sitting there unallocated. Now, I understand where the challenge here is in relation to resource, but is the department considering making any bids for capital funding as part of the January monitoring round in the context of significant parts of Northern Ireland very in need of roads maintenance?
Okay, so we're continuing just to assess the position overall. October monitoring we didn't bid because we had a number of unknowns, particularly around the A6. So we're still working through what might be required for that. In addition, we're also trying to maximise spend on structural maintenance. So again, colleagues in Roads and Rivers are just working through to see what the figures might look like. So we're not quite at a position to be able to determine that yet, but clearly we'll come back and brief the committee just on our January monitoring bids whenever we get to that stage as well.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We now go to Padraig Delargy for a question.
Yep, my questions are actually around the budget rather than the October monitoring, so I'll come back.
What we'll do is we'll bring you in first on that one, Padraig. Okay, Liz Kimmins.
I'm the same, Chair, so I'm happy to wait as well.
No problem. Roy Beggs.
I'm shocked what you're saying about the October monitoring round, and in particular to do with Northern Ireland Water and TransLink, which is owned by the Northern Ireland Transport Holding Company. Both of them are companies and directors subject to company law and the financial sustainability of their organisation and the associated ability to trade, provided they are sustainable. Now, the bid was for 19.7 million for Northern Ireland Water, and they were allocated 1.5 million. And you're saying that they're really eating through their cash reserves, and you think there's enough to get to early January. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, on current estimations, we're talking about probably the second week of January, yeah.
So is that enough to get to the January monitoring round? No?
Technically, no. If, as one of the previous members said, if the January monitoring outcome isn't known till towards the end of January, there is that gap of a couple of weeks, and therefore, if we're not clear in the coming weeks, then we have to start working with Northern Ireland Water to say what are the consequences of this and what do we need to act now.
I just have to say, I think it's unacceptable we're talking about whether or not the hospitals will get water, whether or not homes will get water. This is a basic requirement for health, that there would be clean drinking water and sewage would be treated. In terms of emergency procedures then to keep Northern Ireland Water viable, because it looks as if that's what's going to have to happen, are there funds available to the executive for emergency transfers before the January monitoring round?
Okay, so at the end of October monitoring, the executive did allocate all funding that was available. Now, DOF officials have asked for any reduced requirements coming through from departments to be advised to them sort of immediately. So they are aware of some reduced requirements, but again, it will be executive decisions on how that funding is allocated and if any funding would be allocated in advance of January monitoring as well. But we are in close contact at official level with DOF colleagues on it.
I'm aware that some companies with negative equity can continue to operate provided they have a letter of comfort credit. So would a letter of comfort credit from the Finance Minister be sufficient to enable that to happen until January monitoring round?
That's a hard question to answer for us. The short answer is we don't know. I mean, our pursuit is to try and get the money to try and keep things going.
I just think it's ridiculous that the basic facility of water is not being provided by our allocation of funds. Turning then to TransLink. TransLink, there were two aspects of the funds for TransLink. There was a baseline bid of 24 million, and then it was linked in also in terms of lack of income. Now, what are TransLink's reserves, and what is their expected level of reserves at the end of the financial year? I mean, is there any question of their viability as well? Again, they're subject to company law. So, what is their cash flow situation?
Well, as outlined earlier, their reserves, they had probably healthier reserves as we came into this financial year, backed up by the COVID money that was provided last year. That has now started to run down, and so they had requested that we bid for 41 million because they needed that to keep the organisation above its reserve level, and we got nothing for that as it outlined. Therefore, we're sitting today at around 35 million, and the tipping point for them as an organisation where they get concerned is 25 million. So, we're at that kind of critical stage now where either there's a great uptake in public transport in the weeks ahead and towards the end of the financial year, or that we face a challenging period by way of the impact on their reserves and the implications that would have for their fiduciary duties. So we're in a period of unknown at the moment, but you would hope that there would be further funding found for them and that there would be an uptake in public transport, and that would continue that trajectory that has happened in recent months to see them through to this financial year. But at this stage, it's hard to say when that would come to an end because there are so many factors that have to be played in.
The bid for 19 million for lost revenue, which was not accepted, just $500,000 was given. How much of it, can you give us a breakdown of the 19 million in terms of TransLink, roads, parking, roads enforcement and taxi support? So what was the breakdown of the 19 million? How much in particular was bid for TransLink because of loss of revenue?
Okay, yeah, so TransLink was 17 million, roads, parking 1.5. There was the taxi support, which was met, which was a 0.5, and then with small easements and other COVID funding of 0.6, which nets off.
Okay. You seem to be saying then that TransLink are concerned that their levels get down to 25 million, but that's still a sustainable company, surely, at that stage. So are you saying they can get to the monitoring round as a viable company?
I think it's. I'm not going to say okay, but I think they'll be getting to the January monitoring and the issues associated with it aren't as critical for them as they would be for Northern Ireland Water. But if we get nothing in the January monitoring for them for the rest of the financial year, then of course there will be issues there that we have to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's all, members, in relation to the October monitoring round 2. I think some members will have their questions already answered, but I suppose first and foremost, in relation to the resource inescapable bids in Annex B, the Department does not provide indicative figures for its overall resource requirements. So could officials provide the committee with this information for each of the 3 years in the budget period?
Yes, sorry, actually we can provide that. So it's really our baseline opening position plus then the inescapable bids then that we've put forward, but we can come back in writing with those full figures, yeah. Yep. Apologies, we should have made that clear actually. This was all predicated on the opening baseline position rolling forward.
Okay, no problem. In relation to Northern Ireland water, energy pressures and other inescapable pressures, there is a requirement for 23 million in year 1, reducing to around half that in years 2 and 3. Why is that, and can the Department provide more detail on this requirement? I'm thinking off the top of my head energy costs, but is there other factors at play?
That's exactly it, Chair. It's about energy costs and the hope that they will hopefully settle a bit and that they will continue to look at their own renewable sources at the same time.
Okay. The Department for the road network, the requirement for the road network almost doubles between year 1 and year 3. Why is that, and can we also have more detail?
Okay, yeah. happy to pick that one up. Yep. So that's primarily in relation to increases, again, in PPP contracts, drainage charges, energy costs as well, which are continuing to increase, as well as inflationary uplifts too. So there's sort of 4 key areas within the road network areas that have been put forward. And again, those are all considered inescapable. So that's really to maintain the current service provision rolling forward into future years.
Okay. The capital requirement for strategic road improvements increases from 4.5 million in year 1 to 36.9 million in year 2, and then 40.9 million in year 3. So can we have a wee bit more detail as to why those figures are as they are in relation to strategic road improvements?
Yeah, so again, that's very much the ramping up of any schemes that would be taken forward as strategic road improvement schemes. And again, those are just indicative figures in terms of how profiles may work out in future years, with decisions needing to be taken around what road schemes might progress.
Okay. The overall capital requirement almost doubles between year 1 and year 3. How confident is the department that it could deliver all these capital projects if the funding is provided and the resource funding is made available? Obviously, this is a big issue in relation to delivery if awarded the funding required.
We need to be supported with the resource budget to deliver that. You know, it would be a huge challenge for us as a department to deliver those scale of capital projects without an increase in our resource budget. And that has been the tension for us, even as recently as this year as well, insofar as, you know, we got a lot through the capital, but less so through resource, and therefore it's difficult to buy staff, buy bodies, so to speak, to help us deliver on the services. So it would be critical to us going forward that we would have the resource to support the capital that we need to deliver on.
Okay. Yeah,
I was just going to say we would need to revisit then the capital profiles once we know our resource budget outcome, just to make sure that the two do align and ultimately that the capital can be deliverable, because Declan says that has been a key challenge.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Patrick Delargy for a question, please.
It's just around the A5. I noticed that the 2022 to 2023 bid is for 7 million, and that this then increases to over 50 million in the following year. So I'm optimistic here that that's a sign that the A5 is finally getting underway. Could you clarify that for me?
Want to bring Andrew at this point?
Well, yes, so we're optimistic too. As you know, we got an interim report on the PA on the public inquiry in September of 2020, and the department statement came out in March 2021. Now that requires us to do an addendum to the environmental statement, and that is being prepared at the minute. So basically, the profiles that we have worked out are, assuming that we go through the further steps, we have contractors in place. That's the optimistic construction programme that has been priced in there.
Okay, perfect. There was just another couple of questions around that financial statement as well. The capital requirement for rail obviously increases from 136 million in year 1 to 244 million in year 3. So why is that? And can you kind of detail, I suppose, why that is a requirement? So does this include improving the dairy line as part of it? Because obviously over the last few months I have come to the committee and in the chambers we all a lot of times mentioned the pressure and the real need to increase that dairy rail at the minute.
It will include a range of things, including critical safety works, rail carriages, and then the railway tracks themselves. We can certainly provide a more detailed breakdown of those figures. I don't have it to hand today, but we can get further info on those figures.
And in that breakdown, is that specific to different regions? Would you have that information?
We wouldn't have that level of detail. We wouldn't have that sort of level of detail.
When will that be determined?
So that will go through as projects are approved and the business cases are approved. Then we go down into that lower level of detail and have that profiled out then for future years as well.
Okay. Yeah, just one final one around the funding as well. So obviously there is a capital requirement for the Belfast cycling network, but we need that active travel replicated across the north and in each region. I know for example in the south it's £66 per head. And obviously that's a lot less here. So are there more plans for cycling lanes in Derry and in other regions across the north?
I think it's fair to say Minister's a real advocate of active travel. as I'd outlined earlier, we have challenges with a lot of statutory requirements that we have to fund first, and therefore what is left to deliver other services such as this is a challenge for us. But certainly the Minister is seized of that and is supportive of putting money towards those schemes. So I can't say with any detail at this stage, but I would reassure you that they will all be looked at actively, pardon the pun, as we go forward. Yeah.
Okay, just one final point around the Reservoirs Act. So there are additional bids for additional staff to implement the Reservoirs Act. Obviously, it's vital that we ensure the safety of these reservoirs, but can you elaborate on that, and is there funding included here as well?
We bid for funding, so we took responsibility for the Reservoirs Act from the 2nd of June. It was cleared through the Assembly on the 1st of June, and then we took responsibility for that. Minister, as you will know from a letter to the committee last week, has launched a consultation on how we commence the legislation. It is a case of form follows function, but on our guesstimates of what we will need by way of going forward, we have developed an indicative staffing structure that we think will be needed to support the rollout of the Reservoirs Act going forward, and that we've bid for that accordingly in the budget. I think from the top of my head it's around 450 million a year.
That's right.
450,000 a year going forward over the next 3 years. So
that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Liz Kimmins now for a question.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose just a couple of questions. On this, in the budget bids, I noted that the bids for strategic road improvements have increased from 4.5 in 2022-23 to 36.9 for the next year and over 40 for the following. So just if I could get a wee bit more detail on that, and to ask as well, is there funding for the A1 scheme within those figures?
Yeah, unless
Well, that is difficult to answer because at the moment the Department is working on a series of transport plans. The first of those plans, which is due to come out shortly for consultation, is the Rstn transport plans. What we do have is we have a number of schemes that have been progressing towards the delivery stage, and what we have included in the bid is the amount of money that we would be needed to take those schemes forward. But the decisions have not been made yet on which schemes will actually be delivered.
Okay, and then does that mean that would the A1 be one of those schemes that will be considered?
Oh, definitely. It's certainly the Department's very keen on that from a safety point of view, and it's one that has been well advanced in advance of construction.
Yeah, no, that's good. Just in relation to rural roads, would like to get a wee bit more detail on the investment plan for rural roads in the following years. And do you envisage that there will be an increase in the Rural Roads Fund, for example?
The Rural Roads Fund's really assessed each year. The reason that was introduced was that when we do allocate money to road maintenance, we tend to allocate it towards the busier roads. And over a period of years, we had noticed that the very low traffic rural roads were suffering badly and really weren't getting high enough up in the priority list. So that's why a special fund was created for that. I certainly expect that fund would be rolled forward, but it's considered on a year-by-year basis.
I suppose really with the issues, particularly in some of the council areas in terms of resurfacing, I would have imagine that there'd probably be a bigger backlog and possibly a greater need on rural roads. So hopefully we will see, increased investment in relation to that, because I know certainly in my own area that would be a big issue. Just in relation to the Narrow Bridge, it states there's a capital requirement of 0.1 million in each of the 3 years in respect of it. Just to ask, what does that relate to?
Well, the Narrow Bridge is being funded from the Shared Island Fund, and it's actually being taken forward by Louth County Council. But there is a staff requirement required on the northern side of the border. For example, we have to get a bridges order. We have to ensure that it ties into the road network on our side. We have to ensure that there's active travel provision that it links into. So it's not actually to deliver the project, that's being done by Louth, but it's to take forward the work that needs to be done in relation to the northern side of the border.
Okay, no, that's grand. Just wasn't really sure what that was for. And just finally, and you know, it is good to see, I suppose, a multi-year budget would provide an opportunity to better plan and prioritise finances. Just to ask a wee bit more about how this budget will allow the department to do that and make use of the available finance then.
I guess the overarching point is that it allows us to plan with a bit more certainty, subject to getting what we've bid for. So therefore, it allows us to look at our priorities over the next couple of years and plan those accordingly. So I think that's the key thing for us. And in the absence, as I said earlier, of a programme for government at the moment, we still have our own business plan as a department minister's key priorities, and we're looking to make sure that they're supported as we move forward over the next 3 years.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Chair David Hillitch.
Thanks, Chair. On Monday, the committee had a report on decarbonisation before the Assembly, and it was greeted with cross-party support all round, and indeed the Minister as well was very supportive of it and seemed to be enthused by it. Is there enough in there to kickstart the outcomes of that? Are you happy enough that there's things in there that will allow that report and the recommendations contained within the report to come forward? Again, just referring to this morning there, you had the likes of the York Road interchange. The traffic was 3 lanes of traffic which head over that way. We're basically tailed back to Greencastle, and of course the good people of North Belfast get the benefits of that, you know. So I'm just wondering, examples like that, is there enough in that budget to kickstart decarbonisation as far as you should be concerned?
I think the way I'll try and answer that is that your Minister has a very clear view of what she wants to see by way of decarbonisation. She's a real advocate for it and driving this, helping to drive this agenda, and certainly a lot of what she would have in her plans for us to do going forward will improve situations, but they all have to be supported by funding, and there's a lot of that contained within the bids that we put in for the next few years. So I guess it's a case of if the bids are supported and we have the baseline plus the bids there to help us go forward, then a lot of what we want to do in the next few years will contribute to that wider agenda of decarbonisation. So I think that's probably the way I would answer.
It'll be fairly high up the department's agenda.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. George Robinson, did I see you indicating for a question? Yes.
Sorry, Chair. It's in relation to the grim news that we have got today from the department in relation to the water and sewage situation. And I was wondering, during the summertime, some years, not every year, we've got the dry up of the reservoirs and so forth, and there's a call goes out to households and so forth to conserve water as much as possible. I'm just wondering if the department will take that on board, particularly at this present time where everybody's facing such a harsh dilemma about the water and the sewage, particularly our hospitals, and even our domestic situation, or homes and so forth. If the department would undertake to at least put out a call to be able to conserve water as much as possible under the present circumstances.
Yeah, I think the best way to answer that is that, you know, the water infrastructure has been underfunded for years, and as I said earlier, this year is probably the first year in a long time. Well, it is the first year in a long time that it has benefited from the funding that was agreed by the utility regulator as what was needed. So there is funding there. We are working with Northern Ireland Water. Northern Ireland Water is certainly seized of the need to ensure that we have a good water supply in Northern Ireland, and we do, and it is very effective. When you hear those calls, it's usually about people overusing it rather than water seeping away through pipes. I know there's a bit of both, but it's primarily more people overusing water, and then the need to power up and get the reservoirs moving with the generators and all the rest of it. So that's why you normally hear that challenge at the summer of people being more conservative with their water. But in more general general terms, that the PC determination will hopefully take us in the right direction over the next 6 years or so.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, just another point in relation to the streetlight situation, and particularly at the present time. We're right into the middle of winter now, and particularly we're unlit housing estates and so forth where a lot of elderly people live. I think that a lot of emphasis should be directed towards the street light situation. Now, for example, in Limavady here at the present time, we have street lights that takes people from one street to the other. That'd be Irish Green Street to Catherine Street, and the lights there have been out over a week. We have reported it, and I'm just wondering, is that part of the cost-saving exercise that the department's carrying out at the present time? Thank you very much.
To reassure you, we're not turning off lights or anything like that, but it's probably lights being repaired.
No, I can respond to that one. If there's a delay in that repair in Limavady, it's not due to funding cuts at present. The current service that we're providing is our normal street lighting repair service, where we have target times and so on. The department is certainly very keen to continue with that service. Although, having said that, it is one of those things that we're having to consider in the contingency plan, because the contingency planning exercise that we're looking at within the department, as Declan and Susan have said, is looking at all areas of uncommitted spending. But there's no decisions been made on that yet.
Okay.
We need those lights on as quickly as possible from a safety point of view.
Thanks for that, George. I think that point's been noted.
Thank you very much.
Okay, go now to Andrew Muir, please, for a question. What's the lights like in North Down, Andrew?
Let there be light. Okay, just a couple of things. See, in terms of the capital bids and what's been cited as the pressures upon resource to be able to deliver capital, I think I raised this a while ago, but is the department considering other measures to be able to get around this issue, such as capitalising the resource costs if these are going towards infrastructure spend? Because that would be standard in a number of organisations, that if there's a capital project proceeding, that the resource costs in terms of labour would be capitalised as part of that. But so I just wanted to see if that is being considered to allow the department to proceed with capital funding, conscious of the fact that capital funding was surrendered a financial year ago, and also there's capital funding unallocated in this current financial year.
Yeah, where it's possible to do that, we are doing that. In fact, in a Living with Water programme, for example, we are capitalising practically all posts, all bar one or two. So we do take that opportunity, but there are strict conditions around that, and I think it's 80% of the facility has to be owned in public.
Yeah, so we are very conscious of the need to capitalise what we can given the budget position, and we do go through and work very closely with teams across the department to identify where new capital schemes are starting out, to make sure that we can capitalise as much as we can, all within the accounting guidelines that we have to work to. And we've got a team within my own directorate in the department that really is focusing in on that at the moment to make sure that we are maximising that where we can do so. And it's something that we'll keep in mind as we move forward into the next financial year as well, particularly as those new things come on. As Declan's mentioned, Living with Water, it's the same with every new thing that comes on. We sit down and we try to figure out what's resource and hit the resource budget, and what can we capitalise within the capital budget to try and maximise our position there within the guidelines.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's really important, because the pressure is not so much upon capital but upon resource. But the ability to deliver capital spend and infrastructure for Northern Ireland is really, really crucial in the time ahead, and there is money available for that. So I think it's a key that we look at that. Just a couple of other questions. One of the key things around the Department of Infrastructure and the Minister when she came into office was around active travel and about spend in relation to that. The 3-year budget settlement has the opportunity for the department to transform things in that sphere and really deliver the investment that's required. The level of investment in active travel in Northern Ireland is pitiful. It's extremely low. I just want to see what attempts are going to be made as part of this budget settlement to rebalance that expenditure towards active travel, because whilst the £20 million Blue Green Fund is welcome. The £2 a head on active travel in Northern Ireland really does need to be significantly changed.
Yeah, as I said earlier, Minister's an advocate, a real advocate for active travel. We do have the limitations insofar as the scope of the budget, how much we can divert away from what are statutory requirements and then what is left, so to speak. But the active travel budget, small as it has been to date, certainly in Minister's time has increased, and I think has doubled in the last year, if that's not overstated. So I've used double twice today, but I think this one is doubled as well. So there has been a marked up increase in it. But yeah, there's more can be done there, but it's about having the funding to do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Declan. I think just from my perspective, I will judge this budget in terms of whether it invests in active travel and public transport, because we can launch all the strategies we want, but it's by putting funding towards that, and that's absolutely crucial. Just some things just in relation to the annex which was provided, I think it's Annex B in terms of inescapable bids. The TransLink, the PSA for 2022-23 is 47 million, and it drops to 25, and then it goes up to 30. Is there any logic in terms of that, why that is so changeable and so significant at the beginning?
So again, that's largely linked into our obligations under the PSA. I don't have specific details here of the breakdown of those with me today, but certainly something we can look into.
Yeah, that's okay. That's appreciated. Thank you. And the last questions is just in relation to Annex D, which is indicative capital requirements. In 2022, it indicates a capital requirement of 11.5 million for York Street, and 2023 to 24 of 9.5 million. What are those costs involved? Because I understand that the project hasn't even went to procurement yet.
I don't have the precise detail. You're quite right. The contract hasn't gone to procurement yet. The Minister has two issues to decide, really. One was that she wanted to make sure that the scheme as designed met with her priorities, including those for placemaking, and there has some work that's been done on that to see if the scheme can proceed with proper attention to placemaking and active travel. The second thing, which I already referred to, is the need for transport plans, and those transport plans are currently under development, and we will await to see if the York Street scheme is within those plans. But if this decision is made to go ahead, there is money that can be spent at an early stage on advanced works.
Okay, that's appreciated. And in terms of the A5, it does have money, as one of my committee colleagues has outlined, allocated for that. And I just perhaps get an assurance that that this project's been bedeviled by delays, that they're confident, you're confident that you're going to be able to spend that money.
Well, again, this is not dependent on our own transport plan. This is an executive flagship project. We're working on the addendum to the environmental statement that will go out for public consultation. There will then be the reconvening of the public inquiry, and subject to that, there'll be a ministerial statement. We have the processes to go through. There are things that could stop us or delay us at different stages, but that the projections that we have made there are on the basis of the getting through all of the statutory stages.
Cheers, thanks very much.
And starting delivery.
Yeah. Cheers, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, like Andrew, I would like to see a wee bit more detail in relation to the York Street piece, in relation particularly to Annex D and the funding uplift. I think a wee bit more clarity for the committee in relation to that would be helpful. I think, Patrick, you had a quick supplementary in relation to the A5, probably?
Just a very quick one on that. Is there a timeline that we can have? Because obviously, I noted earlier that the change from 7 million to 50 million, which is a massive sevenfold increase. What is the timeline? What are we looking at for the commencement of the A5?
There are some decisions to be made on that, actually. I think we would be better following that up with some more information for the committee. It's not straightforward as to when the public inquiry would be reconvened.
it does strike me, and obviously for the people in Derry and Tyrone and Fermanagh, Armagh, that entire region west of the Bann, you know, when Chris Hazard came in, A6 was convened like that. So is it an issue that we're just looking at the other end? Do we need decisive action? What is the hold-up?
No, the balance that we're trying to make is between getting the thing advanced quickly and advancing it in a way that won't leave us open to a successful legal challenge. So that's the issue that we're struggling with at the moment. The addendum to the environmental statement will be published, but there is a question about the timing of that which hasn't yet been resolved by the department. Basically, in simple terms, if we delay it slightly, we can be safer. We can safeguard ourselves against successful legal challenge. If we take it out and deliver it early, there is a bigger chance that there will be a successful legal challenge. And we're just looking at those options at present. But it's only a few months of an issue that we're looking at. It's not a huge delay.
Okay, that's very diplomatically put. No, thank you. You're happy enough with the point clarified?
Yeah, thank you.
We can get further information on that related to the committee if you wish. I'm now going to go to Cathal Boylan and then Roy Beggs.
Thank you, Chair, and it's been a good discussion. But Declan, I don't want the headline to be that TransLink Reserve caught COVID or NAW caught COVID, because I can see now the headlines going out, the water's going to be switched off in hospitals and schools and the lights are going to be turned off. That's not the case. The case here is we went through a monitoring round there, bids made like every other time of the year and they weren't received. My question would be this: what was the department and NAW and TransLink contingency plan for the COVID challenge, besides all those issues of rises and increases in cost of energy, because that was right across the board. The building materials are going up, price of building material. So the department and every department in this, in the executive, should have been aware of this. The increased prices were right across the board. So my question would be, what was it? Because PC21 and George asked a question about, outside of all that, the surge and water, all that stuff will be dealt with through the bids through PC21, which was agreed by the utility regulator for this year anyway, going forward. But I still see an issue which none of us has seen here in terms of how the actual department and all those bodies never looked at the contingency plan for the challenge that COVID actually presented itself. That's the point. That's the point I'm saying. But I can see the negative headlines coming out of today.
No, I think if you construe it in a way that it's COVID related, I think you'll be looking at it incorrectly. I think the issue is more about rising energy costs, and they were unknown at the point in time right up to and including the summertime, and really just came into focus in September, October. Or the organisation Northern Ireland Water, TransLink, the department, and any organisation working closely with us will have been working through COVID, as every other organisation has been, and has put in place plans to deal with it. This is an unprecedented rise in the energy costs that has caused the problem.
COVID was an unprecedented action. Building materials have gone up threefold.
Yes.
Right? It just didn't go up because the materials weren't due to the COVID issue. And to say when somebody does the report on it, they'll find that was the case. But I want to make that point because I don't want it, because there's been a good session here today and a good scrutiny. I don't want to go out of this committee today, the lights are going off, the water's been switched off in hospital schools, because that's not the point. That's factually correct. You cannot say because of the 7 million NAW didn't get, it's Roy's point, because only got 1.5 million, the water's going to be switched off in hospitals.
I can say that if Northern Ireland Water isn't given the funding it needs to take it up to the end of this financial year, that there are going to be serious consequences.
Absolutely, and you're going to bid through a process in January,
yes.
And hopefully that bid will be made, and I'm sure this committee will support that bid. You know what I mean? That's the point.
Absolutely, but we can only go on the information we have today.
Absolutely, and like I said, I was talking to you in May, I couldn't say that it wasn't going, the energy cost wasn't going up 22%. But I think across the world, if people had been looking at it, I think that, the economists would have seen that. But that's my own personal view on it. But back to
I don't know if that scale, if they would have seen it.
No, maybe not. No, but still, it raised. That's the point, and that's the nature of it. So I just wanted to get that off my chest, Chair. Thank you very much. Just in terms of the structural maintenance issue, because 2022, 100 million, 110 the next year, and 120 the following year. But still, in terms of structural maintenance, right? But still, in all, it's saying in the audit report that it takes on average 140 million. What's the issue, Andrew?
It's purely a delivery issue. There is certainly 143 is the requirement. That's what I would like to spend. I would actually like to spend more than that to get into the backlog, particularly on rural roads. But we have had the challenges to our contracts. We have a strategy to get over that. But we, like all parts of the civil service, we have many vacancies in the organisation which we're working to address. So it's 143 is the amount. You're quite right. What has gone into the bid is what we think the maximum is that we could deliver over those 3 years.
No, and I appreciate, Andrew, the sad thing about it is that, I mean, I've sat in this committee a number of years in its old format, and we asked for capital monies. We've got the biggest capital monies ever, and unfortunately we can't deliver because of the resource.
Because we don't have
I mean, you know, the plan, you know it as well as I do. So I mean, hopefully, because there's a lot of rural roads out there does need fixed. Some of the roads Andrew mentioned earlier on haven't been touched in 50 years. You know what I mean?
I think if our capital budget were to be supplemented by a healthy resource budget, then we would be in a stronger position to deliver. I think that's a fair point.
Okay. Fair enough. And just one other point in relation to the concessionary fare budget. Is there any bid for an increase in the concessionary fare budget in the future so that we can look after the half fare people can get a full fare in the future?
Well, I think the first point to make is that the concessionary fare budget always works almost at a loss. I think it's fair to say that it always needs to be supplemented, and usually in the realms of around 11-12 million a year to keep it afloat, so to speak. Minister's very keen that the scheme can be widened out. However, there is a process to go through, and it would need to be supported by the additional funding, because my understanding, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, is that where there is a shortfall, that eats into TransLink, because they then bear the brunt of that. So if we're broadening out the scheme, it needs to be supported by the funding.
So it needs back into the 25 million.
Yep.
Right, no, that's okay.
There's a pattern here. Yeah.
No. That's okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Roy Beggs.
Just going back to the TransLink PSA funding, the 47 million, then 25 million is the second year period, and then 30 million. My understanding, this is supporting lesser used routes, and the funding would go from 47 million one year to 25 million the next. Does that reflect a closure of half the lesser used routes, or why is there such a dramatic reduction?
No, there are certainly no discussions about closing routes or anything at this stage. I mean, first point to say is that the PSA for the next period is still being drafted and developed, and therefore it isn't in place. There will be a number of commitments that TransLink will work through in the lifetime of the next PSA period, but certainly we haven't been having discussions about cutting routes or anything to that.
But if you have the amount of support for lesser used routes, you will undoubtedly have an impact on them. Is that not the case?
I think, lesser used routes are still used by people and particularly in rural communities, etc. So you would hope that that's not a path that we would be looking at in any time soon, insofar as there will be people who lose out then because the service isn't there for them. So at this stage, there's certainly no conversations from the department with TransLink to look at reducing.
Surely if there's an allocation of funding reduction, that will have a bearing on the outcome.
It will have a bearing on the planning for TransLink. If decisions have to be made about routes, that's something that'll be looked at in the round with everything else. But you would hope, particularly as we're trying to increase transport and provision across the region, that we don't then start looking at cutting routes. Everything's an option, but it's not one as a department that we're actively exploring at this stage, and certainly nor is TransLink.
I'm just highlighting, if you change the number, it has an implication down the line.
Yeah, okay, fair
So
point.
I express my concern on that issue. Then mention was made that there's 1.3 million each year for staffing for Northern Ireland Protocol. How many staff are involved, and what are they actually having to do in the Department of Infrastructure over the Northern Ireland Protocol?
So we have part of a division that works and looks at. It's not so much looking at the protocol per se, but it's more looking at the move, I don't want to say fallout, but the next stages from Brexit, and making sure that as a department, policy, legislation, etc., that is relevant to us as a department, that we're alive to that, and that we're doing all we need to be doing by way of responding if there are any changes or need to be changes, if there's any divergence or etc. We need to be looking at all of that. So there is a complement of staff who are based within that division whose primary focus is that, and then there are staff based within the various divisions across the department whose work would be involved in taking forward work that is based around Brexit and going forward. So I don't have an exact number of staff in, but we could certainly get that number. But that's how it's staffed across the department. So we have a core team, and then we have teams spread across, our staff spread across the department who make sure that in their particular area, be that transport, etc., that they're alive to any changes that have come as a result of Brexit.
Then in Annex C, under high priorities, as opposed to inescapable bids, you have a bid for about £21 million a year for TransLink PSA expansion. Is that a glider, or where is this expansion?
I think the expansion is about providing low emission and.
Yeah, so that's really in relation to the PSA obligations. So that's extend routes to look at what TransLink services could be delivered beyond current service delivery. So in the first annex, that's simply to deliver the current service, and then in Annex C, that's an estimate. It's very much an estimate of what might be required to expand the current service beyond what we currently provide, or TransLink currently provides.
Okay. Thank you. Then under routine maintenance and liability, I see the figures go 6.5, 9, and then big jump to 25. Can you give us a breakdown of why you're expecting a big jump? Is this a number of claims that are already in the system because of the poor state of our roads, or why is there a huge jump in that figure?
I think that's mainly bringing the routine maintenance that we carry out as a department back to normal standards. For many years now, we have been reducing. We've had a reduced road maintenance service. That's really, those figures would allow us to go back to a normal level of service, best practice.
Why do you want to wait 3 years before you go back to normal maintenance service?
Well, again, it's a delivery issue. It'll depend on our own in-house resource, our own O&M staff. It'll depend on contractors. You can't just gear those things up terribly quickly.
I'm just concerned that we should be having it faster. Again, in terms of the Blue-Green Fund, active travel, is it all coming out of this Blue-Green Fund, which is sitting about £20 million a year, or are there other funds that are drawn upon? Because as has been said by other members, that's a very small amount and doesn't really show a significant direction in terms of climate change mitigation and encouraging active travel.
I'm only aware of it coming from the Blue-Green Fund. I don't know if there are any other.
Yeah, there's a small amount in the resource budget as well, but primarily it's within the capital budget, within the 20 million, and that will be made up of a number of quite small schemes. So whilst it may be a small amount, sometimes that can have a big impact as well. It spans across a number as well.
I just think we should be more ambitious. DVA then, I understood that DVA was meant to be sustainable in terms of it's bringing in income and for the service that it provides, and it certainly pre-COVID had a very healthy balance sheet. So why are there capital bids for DVA?
Okay, so in relation to the capital bids, there are areas which the department funds, particularly around enforcement. So that represents the element of the departmental funding towards DVA, rather than those costs that DVA would pick up itself through the trading fund.
That being the case, why is there a huge jump in year 2 from 3.4 million to 11.7 million in enforcement in that?
Yeah, so again, that's due to the profile of the expenditure that we're expected to pay in relation to enforcement. We can get you the details of that based on the
It's a huge increase in enforcement. What is going on here? I definitely need more information. And then finally, Dargan Bridge, there's capital bid for Dargan Bridge. What's been proposed in terms of the rail bridge?
That would be a TransLink part of the bid, as far as I know.
I don't know if we have the detail not here with us soon. No, we'll follow that up. Sorry.
There's work that can be done in association with the York Street interchange to dual part of the rail network.
Okay, and in terms of York Street, interchange. Is that money which was already offered, is that secure going forward, or will the time run out on that offer of separate funding?
Andrew, someone to pick that up.
Not sure that there was separate funding for it.
Was it not part of the supply and
Conference.
agreement?
No. Yes, well, that funding certainly has not come to the department, and we will be bidding for that funding during the next 3-year period.
But my question is that offer there going forward, or if we miss the current government, does it go?
I don't think there's anything ring-fenced for it at present. There was a reference to money being set aside for schemes like the York Street interchange,
Okay.
but we weren't in a position to deliver at that stage because of the challenge that we had. And as far as I know, we're just bidding as normal for it in the 3 years ahead.
Certainly, if there is enough funding available, we should be maximising the opportunities there. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Roy. I think some very pertinent points there that we do expect more information on, particularly the DVA question surrounding the enforcement and why in year 2 such a jump. I think that would be good to hear back from. Just 2 questions from myself. Do you want to define intelligent transport systems? Just it's a briefing. It's an Annex D. Intelligent transport systems.
It's basically the electronic systems that go along with managing traffic on the road network. So it can range from traffic signals, that would be a lot of it. It can range from the detector loops that we have on the road network to detect incidents. It can be the variable message signs. It can be the network of cameras that we have around the road network and the communication links with the traffic signals. So it's all of that. All of the IT equipment that you need to run a road network.
And it's actually been good through COVID to see them being utilised for purposes of public health messaging as well. So it's been quite useful to see. Specialised buildings range from...
outside of the government estate, and the government estate includes buildings that can be used for any government function. There are specialised depots which roads and rivers have that can't be used for other things, so they're part of the department's estate rather than part of the normal government estate.
Okay. In relation to the rural roads repair, and this has been a conversation continually at the committee, I think the last time the permanent secretary was at the committee, they talked about the inefficient way in which roads repair in terms of rural roads had been carried out, and how ultimately a new road, if put in right, actually is a greater saving in the long run than the current position in relation to patchwork and pothole repair. I suppose I would just want to get a wee bit more detail. So obviously this is something that I suppose from a layman's perspective we haven't really seen much change in relation to how roads repairs happen, for example. And given that it is costly, and I suppose if not done right, you're revisiting that situation, particularly in winter weather. Has there been any developments or modernisations in different materials, for example, that are used for pothole repair? I'm just very curious about this particular concept, because I do know in other parts of the United Kingdom, for example, there's different mixes, etc., that can be used, essentially that take away the need for the department to look at for the cutting. I'm not a pothole expert, but the cutting of the pothole is absolutely paramount to ensure that there's no water leakage from the sides, which gives it more longevity. Has there been any development or modernisation, or is there any potential developments on that? Because that's a big issue of concern for many of us that have rural roads in our constituencies that just continue to linger.
Yes, Chair, there have been developments, and the main method that we would use for fixing rural roads is velocity patcher, which is a very efficient means of carrying out a repair. You don't have to cut road material out and have the waste associated with that. You actually jet under high pressure the mixture that's going to repair the road. But as far as inefficiency is concerned, the main inefficiency is that we're having to do so much patching. A patching in a rural road is in effect a temporary repair. Now, some of them last for a couple of years, some of them last for a couple of months, but they are temporary repairs. And the problem with the lack of resurfacing that has been done over the years is that we're coming back and doing these temporary repairs, and that is an inefficient method. the most inefficient method, the most efficient method is that you would do only a few of the temporary repairs on a road. You would surface dress it at regular intervals, and then after a couple of goes of surface dressing, you would actually do an asphalt overlay or a bitmac overlay and do a proper repair. So that's the best practice way of doing it. Unfortunately, because of the lack of money for structural maintenance, we have found ourselves patching and repatching in rural roads, and that's not efficient.
I suppose that the patching and the temporary repairs issue is something that, I suppose probably leads many to say, well, it's not an effective service because we're essentially, we have 1 week of bad weather the next week, and predominantly a lot of the patching actually does happen around those periods of bad weather, unfortunately. But across these islands, is there different ways in which that road maintenance and that sort of temporary measures are conducted? Is there differences?
No, there's not really. In the busier roads, we do cut-out repairs and patching, and on the lightly trafficked roads, we tend to use the velocity patcher. The more efficient method would be to do resurfacing at an earlier stage, and that would. It's actually cheaper to maintain a road network in good condition than it is in the long term than it is to maintain a road network in poor condition, which is effectively what we're doing at present.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that was maybe a bit more technical on the road issue, but it's something that pertains to a lot of us. So, look, thank you very much. I think one of the most important points that have come away from this briefing session today is that the committee does expect further information back in relation to how we ensure that there's proper contingencies put in place, particularly around hospitals, in particular with the pressures that you suggested, and schools. So we do look forward for further information on that. But without further ado, thank you very much for coming to the committee this morning, and we will also forward on some particular questions further to the questions that have been asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. Okay.
Okay, members, we'll wait till everybody is brought back up onto the spotlight. I think they are. Yes, everyone's in. Okay, members, that was quite a useful session, albeit it's not a nice way to start December with so many of the issues that have been raised. Now, Cara did raise a particular issue, a proposal at the beginning. I think we're all alarmed by the words that we heard surrounding our hospitals, and I suppose as a committee we have to differentiate between what is potential for a scaremongering, for example. We need to be careful around that language, but it's certainly something that the committee must take note of because it has been mentioned in the departmental briefing. So, Cara, do you want to say again what your proposal was? I think what I did catch was that the committee would write to the Minister of Finance to state that the committee would be supportive of a bid from the Minister of Infrastructure and the January monitoring to protect drinking water supplies, especially regarding any potential impact on hospitals and schools. That's essentially what I think we caught a part of it, but if you want to say what that was, and then I'll go to other members for their views on it.
Yes, sure, thank you. Yeah, more or less that's exactly what I'm saying. Just I noted there the importance around the rising energy costs and the impact that will have in water, and there were some fantastic points made by all members just on, I know what you mean about differentiating what could potentially happen versus what we think will happen. But no, I note the concern, and I do note in our briefing as well, the Finance Minister did say that he would revisit these issues. So I'm optimistic that in January we will see some more investment. But I'm just keen to hear from other members on their thoughts.
Okay, we'll go to Roy Beggs.
I think it's not acceptable that even houses and businesses would have their water interrupted. This is a basic requirement for everyone. So I think the issue is concern that water supply may be interrupted and that Northern Ireland Water may not have the resources to survive until the January monitoring round. That is what the officials have told us. And in terms of our procedures, do we have to write to the Finance Committee rather than write to other ministers? I'm just seeking clarity there. We can certainly write in support to the Minister of this area, in this, our own minister in this area in terms of the infrastructure minister, but I think we are meant to correspond through other committees.
Okay, and again, this has been a proposal that's come, so we're just hearing different members' views. So we've heard Mr. Beggs. Now we go to Cathal Boylan, please.
Yeah, Chair. I mean, the normal procedure is that the department come and ask to make a bid to the general monitoring round or whatever monitoring round, and we as a committee support it. Do you know what I mean? That's generally what happens, and that's what they will do. I mean, so it's, in all my years in the committee, we've never suggested to write in advance of a monitoring round, but they've clearly outlined. And what Ryle was saying there, which, he gave an indication that they're bidding in January again to meet the needs as required coming forward from NIW. Not the point that it may not be switched off, but it would be our responsibility for this committee to turn around saying, going by what the presentation was today. But in general, I would certainly support a bid if it come from the department in January for monies to secure the NIW request, whatever it was, but not in advance of writing before we see what the bid's going to be.
Okay.
I mean, because if the bid was out, if it was an outrageous bid that couldn't be, I mean, there has to be question marks over how much is going to be bid in the first place.
Okay. Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's two issues arising from this. It's the governing and funding model for Northern Ireland Water that we're in this situation that we're in now, and that does need to be considered. I know we discussed that last week, but there is an issue with the long-term governance and finance model for Northern Ireland Water, because they, in any normal situation, they would be able to resolve this issue through borrowings and other financial instruments. The other issue is in relation to the here and now, the January monitoring. If it's January monitoring is great like any other monitoring round, it'll probably be the end of January, and that is, as we've been told by the officials, is too late. So I think if we're writing to the Finance Minister, or if it's the Finance Committee, I don't know what the protocols are in relation to that, we're asking for the financial security to be given to Northern Ireland Water, and also TransLink, because of their issues in terms of being a going concern, and also in relation to Northern Ireland Water, for that to be given at the earliest opportunity, which is the beginning of January, in the context of the information we have outlined. Because I think whether we don't, as I said, we don't know what the figures are, but we need financial security to be given to those two organisations, and particularly Northern Ireland Water, by the beginning of January. These issues were raised in correspondence to the committee a number of weeks ago, and stuff that I raised in the chamber, so it does need to be resolved without delay.
Okay, thank you. So we have a variation of whether or not we are writing to the Finance Minister, Finance Committee, and on what issues and on how we word that. So I'm going to hand over to the clerk, who'll maybe talk us through some of the procedural issues as to how that would formulate itself, and then we will seek agreement, if there is agreement, in what you would like to place within a correspondence. So I'll go to the clerk.
Firstly, Chair, for all monitoring rounds, and I'm not sure if this has been happening, the committee should see sight of all bids, reduced requirements, etc., that the department is proposing to send before they are sent, to give the committee the opportunity to comment on them, and that can be accompanied by an oral briefing. It is acceptable for committees to write directly to the Minister for Finance, as long as that correspondence is copied to the Committee for Finance and presumably to the Minister.
Okay. So, in clarity that, until we receive what the bid is, it would probably be more prudent for the committee to wait until we receive that. Is that what?
That's absolutely correct, Chris.
Well, hold on one moment. Just clarity on the point regarding until you see the bid for potentially for in the January monitoring round for NI Water. Clarity on that point, if you could.
Well, the Minister has already said that it could be considered again in January monitoring. So on that basis, presumably there would be a bid. So the committee could write at this stage.
Okay, so Mr. Beggs, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's the key issue has been said is that we've been told that Northern Ireland Water is doubtful whether it can wait until the monitoring round. That's the key issue. That's the thing that's really jumping out at me in terms of all of this. That Northern Ireland Water, because it is a company and its structure, if it gets into a cash flow problem, there are implications for directors and how it operates. And there needs to be a mechanism to ensure that it will survive until the January monitoring round.
So we could include those in in a correspondence if the committee wish. So what I would suggest is, Tim, we think we have division here. Cal, do you want to come back here because you're looking at me with a blank face?
I don't mind that, but there's one or two things here. So the money, like Andrew says, the round name may not come to the end of January. We will see what they're bidding. So if we support it, that's grand. How are we going to? So we're going to write in advance. You're asking this committee to write in advance.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not asking anything. I haven't made the proposal.
No, but the proposal coming through the committee at the minute is asking the minister to support a bid. So Rice saying that the bid needs to go then, the money needs to be got by the middle of January.
Before, possibly.
Okay, so
Cara, you need to see what the word.
You brought. Do you want to give us a bit of your wisdom on this issue in relation to you did bring forward this?
For me, I think it's just fundamental that we write to the Minister just to acknowledge the briefing that we've had here today, and I suppose the seriousness of it, and just that we as a committee recognise that we have real concern. I mean, these are basic public services. It's our water service, and then with the TransLink issue, that's our public services. It's how our constituents get from A to B. And for me, it's just noting our deep-rooted concern given the briefing on the October monitoring round, and looking to the future, that he pays great attention to our concerns.
Yeah. What we could do, if it made it easier, we could include what Cara has suggested there in relation to our concerns following the briefing that we've just received, and given the Minister of Finance's commentary surrounding supportive of a bid in January for NI Water, we could ask if the concerns that have been raised are taken into account, or has the Minister taken that into account? Something along those lines could be a potential. If that's is that what I think you're suggesting?
I'm content. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to reiterate what I said, we've been told that the monitoring round is too late, so we're not supporting a bid in the monitoring round. Something has to happen sooner.
Okay.
You may write it out, Ryan. You may get a form of words and send it.
I have a proposal from Cara Hunter. We're going to try and get a form of words as to what that looks like, and then if there's a counter proposal or an amendment, then we can take that.
Okay.
Okay. So, Cara, you're suggesting that. Do you want to read out what you're suggesting there in general, so we can get a note of it with the clerk here, please?
Yep, I have no specific wording. I'm happy to forward something on if necessary, but it would just be about noting our deep-rooted concern at the briefing today about the two issues surrounding NI Water, specifically around water quality and things like that. And then secondly, the financial pressures and how that will impact TransLink. So just those two things included, and then calling upon the Minister for Finance just to be aware of our deep-rooted concern. And then I think, Roy, you have something else on top of that.
Simply to ensure that those companies' viability will be maintained in advance of any additional monies that might flow during the monitoring round. Okay.
What we'll do is we will get a form of words and it'll be circulated, and then we can bring that for agreement to our next committee meeting in relation to its content, because I think there is a wee bit of work that has to be done. Do we find a form of words that potentially can suit members or not? Okay? Would members be content with that proposed way forward? Mm-hmm. Okay, members, thank you for that. Nobody else has any other issues they wish to raise following the briefing? I think we all got a lot off our chest there we need to ask. Okay?
Sure, there is follow-up.
Yes.
I mean, you can't separate it out. There's no way. See, you mentioned the contingency plan, because there wasn't contingency there. Because the contingency programme is supposed to cover all the things we brought up today. Because there's no point in saying what Rice just after indicating there, 25 million of reserves. We voted to top up the reserves last year, so the reserves been topped up. So I don't think the department had looked at even the COVID issue, and I've asked the question.
No, they can
because if the department got 723 million capital, and now we're asking for a resource to deliver that. Nobody has said to us, and it's only an example, right? Nobody has said what resources or what personnel we need to deliver that. That question hasn't been asked.
Okay.
So all I'm saying here, the contingencies.
There's questions surrounding
contingency. Absolutely.
Yes, that we need to hear more of. Okay, members, thank you. We will move on now to agenda item number 12. which is the Forward Work Programme. Can I draw members' attention to the proposed draft Forward Work Programme at pages 248 of your pack? Have members any comments in relation to that? I see Andrew's hand raised. Yes, Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the Forward Work Programme, I think the engagement with Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Council in relation to reinstatement of the railway line and also the railway group is important, but I'm also conscious of the Northern Ireland Executive guidance in relation to COVID-19, and I just wanted to seek guidance in relation to whether we should be holding this committee meeting off-site, or should we be reverting back to holding the meetings in Parliament buildings, conscious of the guidance that was issued last week by the First and Deputy First Ministers and the Health Minister.
Okay, and I will allow the clerk to comment, and I suppose my commentary would be, while I do take into account what you have said, I think that given the setting, obviously within a council setting, that I do know those council settings are still continuing to meet in similar format to ourselves, given that we only have 9 members maximum of our committee. In fact, those council chambers are catering for a lot more than that. So I suppose as committee chair, I'm content that we would have the correct procedures and safeguards in place for members to partake in such a meeting. But I'll hand that over to the clerk.
Chair, I think the current guidance is that committees can go out, but yes. I can check if that is being considered for update or change in the near future.
We will ask for that clarity, but as far as we're concerned, that the current policy is still the same, as long as the appropriate safeguards are put in place, that we still can do so, and that facility, particularly in a council setting, is made all the more easier. But I do take your point in relation to other environments. I think probably the visit to Wrightbus was probably the last sort of visit that we probably, in the current climate, will be able to do to an outside organisation such as that.
Yeah, Chair, just through you, Chair, the issue of the visit then afterwards is, where are we with it in terms of the planetarium? Can find that out as well, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Please.
Roy.
Mr. Chairman, we've been asked to work from home where possible, so basically avoid unnecessary journeys. Can I advise what would be the purpose of us going to Armagh in particular, and in particular to the purpose of the Infrastructure Committee, to visiting the Armagh Observatory and Planetarium? Does it receive any funding from this department?
The visit to Armagh Observatory and Planetarium, that's a point that's made. I think it was made by you last week, but we can get clarity on that one. In relation to visiting Armagh City and Banbridge Borough Council, it's quite clear what the purpose of the meeting is. It's to identify.
Second bit.
Yeah, it's the second bit that's causing issue. So I think we will look up as to clarity in relation to that point. But again, that's just an optional visit for members. That there's no obligation to attend that.
It does receive public funding.
Okay, members. Yeah. Thank you for that. We will now move on to any other business. Item 13. Have members any other business they wish to address? Cathal Boylan. And bear in mind that nobody has given me any other business, but
it's just an email I got, and most we got from the motorcycle action group in relation to the road safety. I feel they haven't had a fair hearing in relation to it. And I think most members might have to check back. Maybe members just missed it, but I sent all.
Could you forward that to the committee?
I'll forward on.
And then we can take a look at it. If it requires a briefing.
We sent all the MLAs, and I know every one of us gets loads of emails, but maybe somebody missed it. But it's for us who's from the motorcycle action group. Okay,
Liz, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was actually probably more a forward work programme, but it's okay for AOB as well. It was just to see, was there any update on when we'll get the briefing on the roads resurfacing, and we'd asked also for the industry representatives to come in. So just see, was there any update when that will be happening?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is, but we can get further clarity on that and come back to you directly and come back to the committee. Okay, members, no other items have been raised. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and could I advise members that the date, time and location of next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 8th of December 2021 in the Palace Stables, the Palace Demise. domain, Armagh BT 64EL. Following the meeting, the committee will take part in a visit to the Armagh Planetarium, College Hill, Armagh BT 619DB. Advise those members in the room of the need to maintain social distancing while leaving the meeting, and to ensure that they remove all of their own paper, water, glasses, etc. From the meeting room when they leave. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound.